When kitchen slave Catalina's suppression collar shatters, 15 years of conditioning breaks, revealing she's the last of a hunted bloodline with the power to heal minds. The Eastern Consortium has been enslaving and weaponizing people like her, turning empaths into assassins. Now Catalina must choose between the safety of invisibility and the dangerous path of liberation for thousands of victims. In a world where compassion is seen as weakness, she'll prove that healing broken souls is the strongest weapon of all. Chapter 1. The Phantom of the Kitchen. The knife slipped. Blood bloomed across her palm like a crimson flower as Catalina stared at the wound. 3 drops, 4, 5. Each one falling onto the cutting board with a soft plip that echoed too loudly in the pre-dawn silence of the palace kitchens. Clumsy, worthless, property doesn't bleed on the food. The voice in her head sounded exactly like Master Voss, the head cook who'd broken her wrist when she was 12 for dropping a serving tray. Yet Master Voss had been dead for 3 years now. Still, his words lived on in the hollow spaces of her mind, because that's what 15 years of slavery did to you. It made the cruelty eternal. Catalina? She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A young girl stood in the kitchen doorway, maybe 16, with fresh brand marks still red and angry on her shoulder. The same serpent crown symbol that burned into Catalina's own flesh. New meat, she thought automatically, then hated herself for thinking like them. I'm sorry, the girl whispered. I didn't know anyone else would be here this early. I couldn't sleep. The nightmares... Don't, Catalina said, her voice barely a rasp. Even after months of speech therapy with healer Marin, words still felt like swallowing glass. Don't apologize. Never apologize for existing. The girl's eyes widened. No one had ever told her that before. Catalina wrapped her bleeding palm in a kitchen towel, the white fabric turning pink. From there, she moved to the stove, lighting the flames with practiced efficiency. The familiar routine calmed her racing pulse. Olive oil in the pan, diced onions, the sharp scent of garlic hitting hot metal. What's your name? She asked, without turning around. Elena, came the whispered reply. Elena Vasquez. I was at the San Miguel convent before they took me. I wanted to be a healer. Wanted. Past tense. Because girls like them didn't get to want things anymore. I've been here 15 years, Catalina said, cracking eggs into a bowl. The shells fell in perfect pieces, never a fragment lost to the mixture. Perfection born from terror. You learned to survive. You learned to disappear. Is that what you did? Disappear? Catalina paused, her whisk frozen mid-beat. In the reflection of the metal bowl, she could see her own face. Pale skin, dark circles under brown eyes, cheekbones too sharp from years of eating scraps. A ghost wearing human skin. Yes, she whispered. I became a shadow. But then Elena stepped closer, her young face curious rather than afraid. You don't smell like a shadow. You smell like... starlight. The whisk clattered to the floor. Impossible. The suppression collar around her throat should block any scent beyond basic human musk. She'd worn it for so long she'd forgotten she even had one. The cold iron had become part of her, like a second skin. You're imagining things, Catalina said quickly, bending to retrieve the fallen utensil. Trauma does that. Makes you smell things that aren't there. Yet even as she spoke, something stirred deep in her chest. A warmth she hadn't felt since childhood, pressing against the collar's magic like a candle flame fighting the wind. Maybe, Elena said softly. Or maybe some lights are too bright to hide forever. Before Catalina could respond, the kitchen doors burst open. Guard Captain Torres strode in, his scarred face twisted in its usual sneer. Behind him, 2 junior guards flanked a trembling kitchen maid. Someone's been stealing food, Torres announced, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. 3 loaves of bread, a wheel of cheese, medicine from the healing stores. Catalina's blood turned to ice. She knew exactly who'd been taking those things, feeding the newer slaves who were too weak to work, too proud to beg. It had been her. Always her. But then Elena stepped forward. "It was me," the girl said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. "I was hungry. I took the food." "No," Catalina started. "Silence," Torres roared. "Property doesn't speak unless spoken to." His hand moved to the shock collar remote at his belt. 15 lashes for theft, 20 for lying. The remote clicked. Elena screamed. Lightning raced through the collar around the girl's throat, sending her crashing to the stone floor. Her body convulsed, back arching impossibly as electricity turned her nervous system into a weapon against itself. "Do something," Catalina's mind screamed. "Help her. Save her. Be more than a shadow for once in your miserable life." But her feet stayed rooted to the floor. Her voice stayed locked in her throat. 15 years of conditioning held her paralyzed as Elena writhed in agony just 10 feet away. The shock stopped. Elena lay gasping, tears streaming down her face. "Clean this up," Torres said to Catalina, gesturing at the girl like she was spilled wine. "And remember, property that steals gets sold to the fighting pits. Property that lies gets sold to worse places." He stalked out, leaving behind only the scent of cruelty and Elena's soft sobs. Catalina dropped to her knees beside the broken girl, her hands hovering uselessly above Elena's trembling form. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to." "It's okay," Elena breathed, struggling to sit up. "You taught me something important." "What?" "Sometimes being invisible keeps you alive long enough to matter." As if pulled by a string, Catalina's hand moved to the collar at her own throat. The metal felt colder than usual, heavier, and for the first time in 15 years, she wondered what would happen if it ever came off. Chapter 2: The Shadows Territory. The secret passage behind the wine cellar smelled like old stone and newer secrets. Catalina pressed her ear to the hidden door, listening for voices beyond. The Southern Court's palace was riddled with these forgotten corridors, servants' paths built centuries ago and largely ignored by the current occupants. She'd mapped every inch during her 15 years of invisible existence. Tonight, those forgotten spaces served a different purpose. "The Northern Territories are becoming problematic," a deep voice rumbled from the other side of the wall. "Alpha Sovereign Castellanos refuses to acknowledge our territorial claims." Catalina's pulse quickened. This wasn't supposed to be happening. No formal meetings were scheduled for the wine cellar tonight. She'd checked the master calendar 3 times. More importantly, she recognized that voice. Duke Mendoza, Alpha Sovereign Lucian's cousin and head of military operations. A dangerous man to overhear. "Let him refuse," came another voice, smoother, more cultured. "When the time comes, we'll have what we need to make him comply." Through a crack in the stone, Catalina could see 3 figures hunched over a table laden with maps and documents. Duke Mendoza's massive frame dominated the space, while 2 other alphas, she couldn't identify them from this angle, bent over territorial charts. "The cargo from the Eastern Consortium arrives next week," the smooth voice continued. 50 units, all high quality. Some even have useful bloodlines. Units. They were talking about people like cargo shipments. "Lucian won't approve," Mendoza growled. "He's been asking too many questions about our acquisitions lately." "Lucian doesn't need to know. Not yet." Catalina's hand moved unconsciously to her brand. The serpent crown symbol suddenly felt like it was burning again, the way it had the day they'd carved it into her 8-year-old flesh. She shifted position to hear better, and her elbow bumped against a loose stone. The scraping sound echoed through the passage like thunder. "What was that?" Mendoza's voice turned sharp. Footsteps approached the wall. Catalina's body moved on instinct, years of survival training taking over. She melted deeper into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness itself. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her heartbeat quieted to a whisper. Invisible. Forgettable. A ghost in the walls. The footsteps paused just on the other side of her hiding spot. From there, she heard the scrape of stone as someone examined the wall for loose mortar or hidden openings. Must have been a rat, the smooth voice said finally. These old passages are full of vermin. Vermin. Yes, that's exactly what she was to them. Something that scurried in the walls beneath notice. The meeting resumed, but Catalina had heard enough. As the voices faded to whispers, she began her careful retreat through the servant passages. Each step was calculated, each breath controlled. She'd learned to move like smoke. There one moment, gone the next. But as she navigated the familiar corridors, her mind raced with what she'd overheard. Cargo from the Eastern Consortium. 50 units. Useful bloodlines. They were buying more slaves. More children to brand and break and scatter across the kingdom like broken toys. Despite that, she was just one person. One shadow in a palace full of light. What could she possibly do against men who commanded armies? The answer came to her as she emerged from the passages into the main kitchen. Nothing. She could do absolutely nothing. But maybe someone else could. From the servants' quarters came the soft sound of Elena crying herself to sleep. The same sound Catalina had made every night for the first 5 years of her captivity. What followed was a decision that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Tomorrow, she would find a way to warn someone about the meeting. Someone with power. Someone who could act. The question was, did she have the courage to risk everything to save people she'd never meet? As the silence stretched, Catalina realized she already knew the answer, and it terrified her. Chapter 3. The Stirring. The dream always started the same way. Catalina ran through moonlit forests, her bare feet silent on the moss-covered ground. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with exhilaration. Pure, wild joy that tasted like freedom and smelled like pine trees and winter air. In the dream, she had no collar, no brand, no voice that cracked and whispered like broken glass. In the dream, she was free. But tonight, something was different. As she raced between ancient oaks, a scent caught her attention. Cedar smoke and mountain rain and something else. Something that made her chest tight with longing she couldn't name. She followed the scent deeper into the forest until she reached a clearing where silver moonlight pooled like liquid metal. And there, waiting for her, a man. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver and eyes like winter storms. He stood perfectly still, watching her approach with an intensity that should have frightened her. Instead, her soul answered with recognition so deep it shook her bones. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice like distant thunder. "Neither are you," she replied, and gasped because her voice was strong and clear in her own. He smiled then, and the expression transformed his stern features into something beautiful and terrible. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" "You know who I am." And she did. Deep in some hidden part of herself, she knew exactly who he was. What he was. Mine. The word rose unbidden in her mind, shocking her with its possessive certainty. This stranger, this impossible man who existed only in dreams, somehow he belonged to her, and she to him. "Wake up," he said gently. "It's time." "Time for what?" "To remember what you really are." He stepped closer, and she could see starlight reflected in his storm-colored eyes. When he reached out to touch her face, his fingers were warm against her skin. Catalina jerked awake with a gasp that echoed off the servant quarters' stone walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. Sweat covered her skin despite the room's chill, and her nightgown clung to her trembling body. "Just a dream," she told herself. "Just another cruel fantasy your broken mind cooked up." But then she noticed something impossible. The suppression collar around her throat was warm, not burning hot like when Torres had activated Elena's shock collar. This was different. a gentle heat that pulsed in rhythm with her racing heartbeat. The metal hummed against her skin like it was fighting something, like it was losing something. Catalina sat up in her narrow cot, pressing her fingers to the collar's surface. The iron felt weaker somehow, less solid, as if the dream had awakened something the metal couldn't quite contain. "Can't sleep either?" She spun toward the voice and found Elena sitting on the edge of her own cot, watching her with curious eyes. The girl's shock collar wounds had healed quickly, too quickly for normal human recovery. "Bad dreams," Catalina whispered. "Or good ones," Elena said softly. "You smell different when you sleep. Like power." There it was again. That impossible claim about scent, about hidden things that should have been buried beyond detection. "Elena, you need to stop saying things like that. If anyone else heard—" "But it's true." The girl's eyes were bright with something between excitement and fear. "I've always been able to smell things others couldn't. That's why the nuns thought I was touched by God. Before the consortium took me." Catalina's blood turned cold. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. You must never let anyone know you have any kind of supernatural ability. Promise me." "Why? What are you so afraid of?" "Everything," Catalina thought. "I'm afraid of everything." But what she said was, "Because they'll kill you for it, or worse, they'll use you until there's nothing left." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Catalina's face in the dim light filtering through the barred windows. Yet when she spoke again, her voice held a certainty that chilled Catalina's soul. "You're not just afraid for me, are you? You're afraid for yourself." Before Catalina could deny it, Elena continued. "What happened to you in that dream? What did you see?" The memory hit her like a physical blow. Storm-gray eyes and a voice like thunder, hands that held starlight, and the bone-deep certainty that she belonged to someone she'd never met. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I saw nothing." But her treacherous body betrayed her. The collar grew warmer, humming louder, and something deep in her chest pressed against her ribs like caged lightning. Elena smiled, the first real smile Catalina had seen from her since the shock collar incident. "Liar," she said gently. "But that's okay. We all have secrets we're not ready to share." As the girl settled back onto her cot, Catalina remained sitting upright, her fingers still pressed to the warm metal at her throat. What followed was the most terrifying thought she'd had in 15 years. What if Elena was right? What if there really was something hidden inside her? Something the collar couldn't completely suppress? And if that were true? What would happen when Alpha Sovereign Lucian Beaumont returned from his northern campaign tomorrow? The man whose scent she somehow recognized from dreams she'd never had. The man who might be coming to destroy everything she'd built to stay alive. As if the universe had heard her thoughts, the collar pulsed once more, brighter this time, like a beacon calling out to something in the darkness, something or someone calling back. Chapter 4. The Convergence Begins. The autumn convergence arrived like a storm dressed in silk and gold. By dawn, the palace courtyard swarmed with carriages bearing the crests of 7 different territories. Servants scurried between the vehicles like ants, hauling trunks and banners and enough luggage to supply a small army. From the kitchen windows, Catalina watched Alpha Sovereigns emerge from their coaches with the predatory grace of apex predators. Each one commanded the space around them through sheer presence, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, and an aura of barely contained violence that made the very air thicken. "Look at them," Elena whispered from beside her, polishing silver with hands that trembled slightly. "They move like they own the world." "They do," Catalina replied, not taking her eyes off the arrivals. Or at least, they think they do. Duke Mendoza appeared in the courtyard, greeting each guest with the practiced smile of a career politician. Catalina studied his face, looking for any sign that he suspected last night's eavesdropping. but his expression revealed nothing beyond polite welcome. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living on borrowed time. "The kitchens are behind schedule," head cook Martinez announced, bursting through the doors with her usual dramatic flair. "Lord Beaumont's entourage will arrive within the hour, and we have 73 guests to feed tonight." Martinez's eyes swept over the assembled kitchen staff like a general surveying troops. When her gaze landed on Catalina, it paused. "You, shadow girl. You're working the ballroom tonight." Catalina's heart stopped. "Ma'am?" "Don't ma'am me. We're short-staffed because half these lazy girls called in sick rather than work the convergence. You know the palace better than anyone. You'll handle the flower arrangements and final setup." "But I don't usually—" "Tonight you do." Martinez's tone brooked no argument. "Unless you'd prefer latrine duty for the next month?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Around them, the other servants had gone very quiet, watching this exchange with the morbid fascination people reserved for public executions. "No, ma'am," Catalina whispered. "The ballroom is fine." Martinez nodded curtly and moved on to terrorize someone else, but Elena caught Catalina's arm before she could escape. "This isn't a coincidence," the girl said quietly. "Something's changing. Can't you feel it?" Truth be told, Catalina could feel it. Ever since the dream, her skin had felt too tight, like she was wearing clothes that no longer fit. The collar around her throat remained warm, and sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she caught herself touching it, pressing her fingers against the metal as if testing its strength. "Feel what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "The pull," Elena said simply. "Like fate is finally catching up." Before Catalina could respond, the kitchen doors exploded open once more. This time it wasn't Martinez who entered. It was a beta wolf from Lord Beaumont's advance guard, a lean woman with predator's eyes and a scar across her left cheek. Her gaze swept the kitchen with military precision before landing on Martinez. "Alpha Sovereign Lucien Beaumont's party approaches," she announced. "Prepare for arrival." The words hit Catalina like a physical blow. Her knees nearly buckled, and the collar at her throat suddenly felt like it was on fire. He's here. He's actually here. For 15 years, she'd existed in the spaces between spaces, invisible and forgotten. She'd built her entire survival strategy around being overlooked, dismissed, ignored. Yet now, as the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the courtyard, every instinct in her body screamed the same impossible truth. Hiding time was over. "Go," Martinez barked at her. "The ballroom won't arrange itself." Catalina grabbed an armful of white roses and fled the kitchen before her shaking hands could betray her terror. But as she hurried through the servant corridors toward the grand ballroom, Elena's words echoed in her mind. Like fate is finally catching up. What followed was the longest walk of her life, down hallways she'd traveled thousands of times before, past portraits of dead nobles who'd never known her name, toward a ballroom where everything would change. Because deep in her bones she knew the truth Elena had seen. Tonight wasn't about flower arrangements or guest service. Tonight was about coming face to face with the man from her dreams, the man whose scent she somehow knew by heart, the man who might be the key to either her salvation or her complete destruction. As the sound of arriving carriages grew louder, Catalina pressed her hand to the collar at her throat one more time. "Please," she thought desperately, "please let me stay invisible just a little longer." But the metal hummed against her palm like it was laughing, and she realized that her prayer had come 15 years too late. Chapter 5. The Recognition. His scent hit her like lightning. Catalina froze in the ballroom doorway, her arms full of white roses that suddenly felt heavier than stone. The massive crystal chandeliers above her seemed to dim as every cell in her body screamed the same impossible truth. He's here. Cedar smoke, mountain rain, winter storms, and wild places she'd never seen but somehow remembered. The dream. Oh God, it wasn't just a dream. Her knees buckled. the roses scattered across the marble floor in an explosion of white petals and thorns. Yet she couldn't move to clean them up because moving meant acknowledging what was happening, and acknowledging it meant accepting that 15 years of careful invisibility was about to shatter. "Careful there!" The voice rolled over her like thunder, deep, commanding, and terrifyingly familiar. From there, she felt rather than see him approach. Each footstep sent vibrations through the marble that her bones recognized. Don't look up, stay invisible, stay safe. But her treacherous body betrayed her. Despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run, her head lifted. Storm gray eyes met hers across 10 feet of empty space. Time stopped. The man from her dreams stood before her in flesh and blood, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver and a face that belonged on ancient coins. He wore the deep blue and silver of the southern valleys, marking him as nobility, as alpha, as hers. The collar around her throat suddenly blazed with heat, so intense she gasped. The metal cracked, a sharp sound like breaking glass that echoed through the ballroom. "Impossible," he breathed, and she heard him clearly despite the distance between them. More importantly, she felt it. The moment recognition hit him like a physical blow. His pupils dilated, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. A low, rumbling sound escaped his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a gasp. "Mine," he said, louder now. The single word carried across the ballroom like a declaration of war. Every servant in the room turned to stare. Conversations died mid-sentence. The very air seemed to thicken with tension and shock, and the ozone scent of impending change. "Run!" her mind screamed. "Run now before it's too late." But her feet seemed rooted to the marble floor. Her voice stayed locked in her throat. 15 years of conditioning warred with something deeper, something that recognized this man on a cellular level and refused to flee. "Alpha Sovereign Lucien Beaumont," she whispered, though she had no idea how she knew his name. His eyes widened. "You know me." She stopped, because how could she explain the dreams? The impossible certainty that she belonged to a man she'd never met. "I serve in your household, my lord." "No." He stepped closer, and with every step, the collar around her throat grew hotter. "You serve no one. Not anymore." Before she could process what that meant, the ballroom doors burst open. Duke Mendoza strode in with 3 other alphas, their faces dark with curiosity and something sharper, suspicion. "Lucien," Mendoza called, his voice carrying false cheer. "We heard raised voices. Is everything all right?" But Lucien didn't take his eyes off Catalina. When he spoke, his voice held an authority that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. "Send for the court physician, and prepare the claiming chambers." "The claiming? Lucien, what are you talking about?" "I found my mate." The words hit the assembled nobles like a bomb. Shocked murmurs filled the air. Someone dropped a wine glass. "That's impossible," one of the visiting alphas sputtered. "She's just a servant. Look at her. She's branded property." Something dangerous flashed in Lucien's eyes. When he turned to face the speaker, his voice dropped to a growl that made every instinct in Catalina's body scream danger. "Say that again," he invited softly. "Please, I dare you." The alpha paled and stepped back. Yet when Lucien turned back to Catalina, his expression gentled. "What's your name?" "Catalina," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Catalina." He said it like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "My name is Lucien Beaumont, and you." His eyes blazed with golden light. "You are my queen." The collar around her throat cracked again, wider this time. Through the fractures, she felt something stir, power she'd forgotten she possessed, warmth that had been cold for 15 years. "I don't understand," she breathed. "You will." He extended his hand toward her. "Come with me, Catalina. Let me show you who you really are." The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to refuse, to return to the kitchens and her narrow cot and the blessed anonymity that had kept her alive for 15 years. Instead, she found herself stepping forward, and the moment her fingers touched his, the collar around her throat exploded into silver dust. Chapter 6. The Claiming Ceremony. The claiming chambers smelled like ancient magic and new beginnings. Catalina sat on the edge of a 4-poster bed that could have housed an entire family, wrapped in silk robes that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Her freed throat felt naked without the collar's weight, too light, too exposed, like she might float away without its anchor. Through the tall windows, she could hear the palace buzzing with activity. Word of the Alpha Sovereign's sudden mate claiming had spread like wildfire, and now half the kingdom's nobility was demanding answers no one seemed able to give. Including me, she thought desperately. Especially me. "Drink this," said Healer Marin, offering her a cup of something that smelled like honey and herbs. The elderly woman had been kind during Catalina's speech therapy sessions, but now her face held careful neutrality. "It will help with the collar's after effects." "What after effects?" Catalina asked, accepting the cup with trembling hands. 15 years of suppression leaves marks on the mind as well as the body. This will help clear away the artificial fog. Artificial fog. As if her entire sense of self had been a lie imposed by metal and magic. Before she could drink, the chamber doors opened. Lucian entered, followed by Duke Mendoza and 2 other men she didn't recognize, both wearing the formal robes of high court officials. "Catalina," Lucian said gently. "These are Magistrate Torres and Magistrate Valdez. They're here to officiate the claiming ceremony." Ceremony? Her voice cracked. Even free of the collar, speaking still felt like dragging words through broken glass. "A formality," Magistrate Torres said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "To legally recognize the mate bond and transfer ownership." Ownership. The word hit her like a slap. After 15 years as property, she was simply being transferred to a new owner. The silk robes and kind words were just prettier chains. "No," she said quietly. The room went silent. "What?" Lucian asked, stepping closer. "I said no. Louder this time, stronger. I won't be transferred like cargo. I won't be owned by anyone ever again." Duke Mendoza's face darkened. "Girl, you forget yourself. You are still branded property of this court. Lord Beaumont is offering you a position far above your station." "Enough." Lucian's voice cracked like a whip. Golden light flared in his eyes, and for a moment, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. When he spoke again, his words were deadly quiet. "She is my mate, my equal. She will be addressed as such, or you will leave this room, permanently." "Lucian," Mendoza said carefully, "surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." He turned to Catalina, and his expression softened. "You're right. The ceremony is wrong. You're not property to be transferred." He knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to her eye level. "Catalina, I'm asking, not commanding, asking, will you accept the mate bond freely? Will you choose me as I choose you?" The question hung in the air like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Truth be told, she didn't understand what was happening to her. The mate bond, the dreams, the way her entire body sang when he was near. None of it made sense. But for the first time in 15 years, someone was giving her a choice. "What does it mean?" she whispered. "To accept the bond?" "It means you'll be queen of the Southern Valleys. It means you'll never wear a collar or bear a brand again. It means—" His voice grew rough with emotion. "It means you'll never be alone again. Never alone." The words hit her harder than any promise of power or position. "And if I refuse?" Pain flashed across his features. "Then you refuse. I won't force this on you, Catalina. The choice is yours." Around them, the court officials shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how claiming ceremonies were supposed to work. Omegas didn't get choices. They were taken, claimed, and used. But Lucian waited, patient, respectful, giving her the first real choice she'd had since childhood. She stopped, looking down at her hands. The brand on her shoulder suddenly felt lighter, like it was losing its hold on her. I don't know how to be anything other than invisible. Then we'll learn together. Something inside her chest cracked open. Not painful, but like ice melting in spring. Warmth flooded through her, and for the first time she caught her own scent. Not the muted, suppressed nothing of a collared omega, but something wild and free and powerful. Starlight, she realized. Elena had been right. She did smell like starlight. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Yes, I choose you. I choose the bond. I choose... Her voice grew stronger. I choose myself. The moment the words left her lips, the world exploded into golden light. Power rushed through her like a tidal wave. 15 years of suppressed magic flooding back all at once. She felt Lucien's emotions as clearly as her own. Relief, joy, overwhelming love, and something deeper. Something that felt like coming home. The brand on her shoulder burst into flames, not burning her, but burning away. When the fire faded, smooth, unmarked skin remained. Free. For the first time in 15 years, she was truly free. But as the golden light faded and the court officials stared in shock, Catalina realized her real challenges were just beginning, because now she had to figure out how to be a queen. Chapter 7. The collar breaks. The power was too much. Catalina collapsed onto the silk sheets as 15 years of suppressed magic flooded through her nervous system like molten gold. Her body convulsed, back arching impossibly as supernatural energy that had been caged for half her lifetime suddenly roared back to life. She felt everything. Everything. Lucian's fierce protective love, Duke Mendoza's barely concealed rage, Healer Marin's medical concern. The guards outside, the servants in the halls, the nobles in the ballroom below. Every emotion in the entire palace crashed into her mind like a psychic tsunami. "Make it stop!" she gasped, pressing her hands to her temples. "Please make it stop!" "Marin," Lucien's voice cut through the chaos. "Help her!" But the healer was already moving, pulling vials and herbs from her medical bag with practiced efficiency. "This is normal," she said, though her tight voice suggested it was anything but. "When suppression breaks suddenly, the backlash can be overwhelming," Catalina finished, the word torn from her throat in a scream. Because it wasn't just emotions flooding back. It was memories. Fragments of her childhood before the collar when her mother had called her Mija Estrella, little star, and taught her to sense the feelings of others, to soothe pain with her touch, to heal wounds that ran deeper than flesh. "You are Celestis, Catalina," her mother's voice whispered across 15 years of enforced silence. "Star-touched, born to heal, born to lead, born to light the darkness." "No," she whispered, curling into a ball on the massive bed. "I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just a kitchen slave with delusions." "Stop." Lucian's voice cut through her spiraling panic like a blade through silk. She felt the mattress dip as he sat beside her, his large hands gentle on her shaking shoulders. "Listen to me, Catalina. You are not nothing. You are not nobody. You are mine, and I am yours. And together we are stronger than any magic that tries to break us." His touch anchored her. Through their newly formed bond, she felt his absolute certainty, not in what she had been, but in what she was becoming. "I can feel everyone," she whispered against his chest. "Every emotion in the palace. It's too much, Lucian. I don't know how to make it stop." "Then don't stop it," Healer Marin said, kneeling beside the bed with a steaming cup. "Control it instead." "I don't know how." "Your mother did." The healer's words stopped Catalina's heart. "Helena Vasquez was Celestis too. She taught me the basics before they took her." "You knew my mother?" "Drink this." Marin continued, pressing the cup into Catalina's trembling hands. It's made from moonflower and silver root. It won't suppress your abilities, but it will help you build shields, mental barriers to protect yourself from the emotional overflow. Catalina drank without tasting, desperate for any relief from the psychic storm. The liquid was warm and slightly bitter, but almost immediately the crushing weight of foreign emotions began to ease. Better? Lucian asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her back. A little. She sat up slowly, testing her mental stability. The emotions were still there. She could sense them like distant music, but they no longer threatened to drown her. Healer Marin, what else do you know about my mother? The older woman's face went carefully neutral. Perhaps we should focus on your recovery first. No. The word came out with more force than Catalina intended, carrying a thread of command that made everyone in the room straighten. I need to know. Please. Marin glanced at Lucienne, who nodded encouragingly. Your mother was one of the last true Calestis bloodlines, the healer said finally. When you were born, she brought you to me for testing. Even as an infant, your empathic abilities were extraordinary. You could calm a crying room full of babies with a single touch. What happened to her? The Eastern Consortium learned of your bloodline. They wanted to harvest your abilities, breed you like livestock to create more empathic weapons. Your mother refused to sell you, so they... Marin's voice broke. They killed her for it. And your father. The only reason you survived was because Helena had hidden your true nature behind layers of protection spells. Protection spells that failed the moment they collared me. The Consortium has been hunting Calestis bloodlines for decades, Duke Mendoza said from his position by the window. His voice held an odd note, something between resignation and satisfaction. They've nearly succeeded in wiping you out entirely. Something in his tone made Catalina's blood run cold. Through her newly awakened senses, she caught the edge of his emotions. Not surprised at this revelation, but confirmation. You knew, she said quietly. You've known all along what I was. Mendoza's smile was sharp as a blade. Of course I knew. Why do you think I arranged for you to be in that ballroom tonight? The room exploded into chaos. Lucian lunged to his feet, golden light blazing in his eyes. What did you say? I said I arranged it, Mendoza replied calmly. Did you really think it was a coincidence that she was there when you arrived? That she was conveniently placed to catch your attention? You son of a... Peace, cousin. Mendoza raised a hand. I did it for the good of the pack. Our bloodlines have grown weak through centuries of careful breeding. We needed fresh power. His gaze fixed on Catalina with cold calculation. Calestis blood will strengthen our line immeasurably. I'm still just breeding stock to them, Catalina realized with sick certainty. A prize to be won rather than a person to be loved. But then Lucian's hand found hers, and through their bond, she felt his absolute fury, not at being manipulated, but at the idea that anyone would reduce her to genetic material. Get out, he said quietly. Lucian. Get out! The command carried alpha authority that made the windows rattle. All of you, leave us alone. Mendoza hesitated, clearly wanting to press his advantage. But faced with his alpha's killing intent, he finally bowed mockingly and left, taking the magistrates with him. Healer Marin paused at the door. The moonflower tea will help for now, but she needs proper training. There are techniques. Later, Lucian said firmly. Right now, she needs time to process. When they were alone, he turned back to Catalina with eyes full of regret. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have seen his manipulation. Should have protected you from... It doesn't matter. She surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. He may have arranged the meeting, but he couldn't fake the bond. Could he? No, Lucian said fiercely. Nothing could fake what I feel for you. What we feel for each other. What we feel for each other. Through their connection, she sensed the truth of his words, a love so deep and immediate it defied logic. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, gathering her into his arms. "We figure out how to be ourselves despite everyone else's plans for us." As he held her, Catalina felt the last of her fear drain away. Mendoza might have orchestrated their meeting, but he couldn't control what happened next. And what happened next was entirely up to them. Chapter 8. The New Reality. The silk nightgown felt like wearing clouds. Catalina stood before the floor-length mirror in what was apparently now her chambers, staring at a reflection that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The girl looking back had unmarked skin where the brand used to be, a throat free of metal restraints, and eyes that glowed with residual starlight. This isn't real, she thought desperately. None of this can be real. But the warm weight of Lucian's emotions through their bond said otherwise. Even now, as he met with his advisors in the next room, she could feel his steady presence like an anchor in her storm-tossed mind. "My lady?" Catalina turned to find a young woman in servant's dress standing in the doorway, one of the girls from the kitchen staff, though they'd never spoken directly. Yes? "Forgive me, but Alpha Sovereign Lucien asked me to attend you, to help you adjust." The girl's voice held careful neutrality, but her emotions were transparent to Catalina's awakened senses. Curiosity, envy, and underneath it all, genuine kindness. "What's your name?" "Maria, my lady. I've been assigned as your lady's maid." Lady's maid. The title felt as foreign as speaking a dead language. "Maria, I need you to understand something." Catalina turned away from the mirror to face the girl directly. "Yesterday, I was scrubbing floors beside you in the kitchen. Today, I'm apparently a queen. I have no idea what I'm doing." To her surprise, Maria smiled. "If it helps, my lady, neither does anyone else." Before Catalina could respond, raised voices echoed from the next room. Through the bond, she felt Lucien's frustration spike into anger. "What's happening?" she asked. "The court is divided about your elevation," Maria said carefully. "Some see it as a sign of hope. Others view it as a dangerous precedent." Of course they do. A branded slave becoming queen overnight would threaten everything the nobility believed about their natural superiority. "Do you think it's dangerous?" Catalina asked. Maria considered the question seriously. "I think change is always dangerous, my lady. But sometimes dangerous is exactly what the world needs." Through the walls, Lucian's voice rose in clear command. "She is my mate and your queen. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to leave." "And go where?" came Duke Mendoza's sharp reply. "You're talking about upending centuries of social order for one girl. I'm talking about recognizing the mate bond that the goddess herself has blessed." "The goddess?" Another voice, one Catalina didn't recognize. "Lucian, think about what you're saying. She's Caelestis. Her bloodline was hunted to near extinction for a reason." Through the bond, Catalina felt Lucien's protective fury like wildfire. But underneath it, she sensed something else. Doubt. Not about her, but about his ability to protect her from the political storm they'd unleashed. "He's afraid for me," she realized. "He thinks he's put me in danger." Without thinking, she moved toward the connecting door between their chambers. Maria called after her, but Catalina was already pushing through into the next room. 7 men turned to stare as she entered. Lucien sat behind a massive oak desk, still wearing the formal clothes from the claiming ceremony. Around him, his advisors and visiting nobles formed a semicircle of barely concealed hostility. "Catalina," Lucien said, rising quickly, "you should be resting." "I can hear you through the walls," she said simply. "All of you. Your voices and your emotions." She let her gaze sweep the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "You're afraid of me." "We're concerned about the implications," one of the nobles began. "You're afraid," she repeated, stepping closer to the desk. Afraid that a branded slave might actually deserve respect. Afraid that your bloodlines aren't as pure as you've pretended. Afraid that change is coming whether you want it or not. Duke Mendoza's face darkened. Girl, you forget your place. My place? Catalina felt power stir in her chest. Not the chaotic flood from earlier, but something controlled and purposeful. My place is beside the Alpha who chose me freely. My place is as queen of these lands. My place is wherever I decide to stand. Golden light began to emanate from her skin, soft but unmistakable. Around the room, the men shifted uncomfortably as her empathic abilities brushed against their minds. Not intrusively, but with enough presence to remind them exactly what she was capable of. You want to know if I'm dangerous? She asked softly. I am. I'm dangerous to anyone who thinks power comes from birth rather than character. I'm dangerous to anyone who believes some people are born to serve while others are born to rule. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I'm dangerous to a system that turns children into property and calls it tradition. The room had gone completely silent. But, she continued, her tone gentling, I'm not dangerous to people who treat others with basic decency. I'm not dangerous to those who believe everyone deserves respect regardless of the circumstances of their birth. She moved to stand beside Lucian's chair, placing her hand on his shoulder. Through their bond, she sent waves of calm support, easing the protective tension that had been eating at him. You can accept me as your queen, or you can oppose me, she said simply. But understand this. I'm not going anywhere. The days of invisible omegas are over. With that declaration hanging in the air, she turned and walked back to her chambers, leaving behind a room full of speechless men and one alpha whose pride blazed through their bond like sunlight. Let them think about that, she decided as Maria helped her out of the formal gown. Because ready or not, Catalina Vasquez was done hiding in the shadows. And she was just getting started. Chapter 9. The First Test. The assassination attempt came at dawn. Catalina woke to the sound of breaking glass and Lucian's roar of fury echoing through their shared chambers. Before her sleep-fogged mind could process what was happening, he was already moving. A blur of deadly grace launching himself at the black-clad figure who just crashed through their bedroom window. Stay back, he commanded. But Catalina was already rolling off the bed, her newly awakened instincts screaming danger. The assassin was fast, faster than any normal human should be. He moved like liquid shadow, a curved blade gleaming in his hand as he danced away from Lucian's claws. But what made Catalina's blood freeze wasn't his speed. It was his scent. Suppression collar. Recent removal. And underneath that, the metallic tang of Caelestis blood. He's like me, she gasped. The assassin's head snapped toward her voice, and she saw his eyes, brown like hers, but empty. Hollow. The look of someone whose mind had been scraped clean and rebuilt for a single purpose. Target acquired, he said in a voice devoid of emotion. Terminating Caelestis bloodline. He moved toward her with inhuman speed, but Lucian intercepted him, golden light blazing from his skin as his alpha power manifested. The two collided in a crash that shook the entire room, but the assassin was already adapting, his movements becoming more fluid, more predatory. More like Lucian's. He's copying you, Catalina realized with horror. He's mimicking your abilities. That was when she understood. This wasn't just any assassin. This was a Caelestis who'd been broken and rebuilt as a living weapon. Someone whose empathic gifts had been perverted into the ability to mirror and counter any supernatural ability he encountered. And he was winning. Lucian's strength was formidable, but the assassin matched him move for move, adapting faster than any opponent should be able to. Worse, each exchange seemed to make the killer stronger, more coordinated, as if he was downloading Lucian's combat experience in real time. I have to help, Catalina whispered, but even as she said it, she knew the truth. She had no training, no experience with her powers beyond the emotional overflow she could barely control. What could she possibly do against a weaponized empath? Then she remembered Elena's words. Sometimes being invisible keeps you alive long enough to matter. The assassin was focused entirely on Lucien, his borrowed alpha instincts driving him to eliminate the stronger threat first. He couldn't see Catalina as anything more than a secondary target, weak, untrained, no immediate danger. He was wrong. Moving as quietly as she'd learned during 15 years of survival, Catalina crept around the edge of the room. The assassin's attention remained locked on Lucien, his brown eyes tracking every movement, every shift in stance, but he wasn't watching for her approach from behind. "Target acquired," he'd said. But what he hadn't said was what she'd sensed in the hollow spaces of his mind. Confusion. Fragments of personality that the conditioning couldn't quite erase. Memories of a life before he became a weapon. A name. Buried so deep he probably didn't even remember it himself. Catalina reached out with her empathic abilities, not to attack, but to search, to find the broken pieces of whoever this man used to be. Miguel. His name was Miguel Santos. He'd been taken at age 7, younger even than her. They'd spent years breaking him down, rebuilding him, turning his gift for emotional connection into a tool for mimicry and murder. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left just enough of his original self intact to make him functional. And buried in those fragments was something they couldn't destroy: the fundamental nature of Celestis blood. The drive to heal rather than harm. "Miguel," she said softly. The assassin froze mid-strike, his blade inches from Lucien's throat. "Miguel Santos," she continued, pouring every ounce of warmth and recognition she could muster into his name. "You were 7 when they took you. Your sister's name was Rosa. She used to braid flowers in your hair." He turned toward her, and for just a moment, confusion flickered in those empty brown eyes. "That's not... I don't..." His voice cracked, suddenly human instead of mechanical. "You do remember," Catalina said, stepping closer. "They tried to make you forget, but some things are too strong to erase. Your sister loved you. She would have looked for you." "Rosa?" The word came out broken, uncertain. "Rosa," Catalina confirmed. "You used to heal injured birds together. You saved a sparrow with a broken wing when you were 6. The blade trembled in his hand. Through her empathic connection, she felt the war raging in his mind. Conditioning versus memory, programming versus humanity. I remember the sparrow," he whispered. That was when Lucien struck. Not with claws or teeth, but with the same decisive leadership that made him an alpha. Instead of attacking the confused assassin, he moved to stand beside Catalina, his presence protective rather than threatening. "You don't have to be their weapon," he said simply. "You can choose differently." Miguel's eyes darted between them, the internal struggle visible on his face. "They'll kill me if I fail. They'll make me watch while they hurt her, Rosa." "They'll try," Lucien agreed. "But they'll have to go through us first, both of us." "I don't understand. Why would you... I came here to kill you." "Because," Catalina said gently, "you're family. All Celestis are family, and family protects each other." The blade clattered to the floor. Miguel collapsed to his knees, 17 years of suppressed emotion flooding back all at once. He sobbed, raw, broken sounds that spoke of childhood lost and humanity nearly destroyed. Catalina knelt beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder with the same instinctive gentleness her mother had once shown her. Through their connection, she felt his pain, his confusion, his desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than what they'd made him. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out together." From the doorway came the sound of running footsteps, guards responding to the commotion. But before they could burst in, Lucien held up a hand. "Stand down," he commanded. "The threat has been neutralized." Duke Mendoza appeared in the doorway, his face tight with barely concealed frustration. "The assassin is under our protection," Catalina said, rising to face him with newfound confidence. "He's been freed from his conditioning." "Freed? Catalina, this man came here to kill you." "This man," she corrected firmly, "was enslaved and tortured into becoming a weapon. Just like I was enslaved and tortured into forgetting who I was. The only difference is that I was luckier." Mendoza's expression darkened. "You can't seriously mean to trust him." "I mean to help him," she said simply. "Because that's what Calestis do. We heal. We don't abandon our own." As if to emphasize her point, she knelt again beside Miguel, whose sobs had quieted to exhausted whimpers. When she touched his forehead, golden light flowed from her fingertips, not the chaotic burst from yesterday, but something controlled and purposeful. She felt his mind like a shattered mirror, pieces scattered by years of brutal conditioning. Carefully, gently, she began gathering the fragments, not trying to force them back together, but simply offering them a safe space to exist. "There," she whispered when the healing was done. "Not fixed, that will take time, but stable. You won't hurt anyone unless you choose to." Miguel looked up at her with wonder. "How did you—" "Practice," she said with a smile that felt completely natural for the first time in 15 years. "Lots of practice we're both going to need." As the guards helped Miguel to his feet, gently at Lucien's sharp insistence, Catalina caught her reflection in the broken window. The girl looking back was no longer a shadow or a ghost. She was a queen, a healer, a force for change in a world that desperately needed it. And she was just getting started. "This changes things," Mendoza said quietly, as they watched Miguel being escorted to the healing chambers under guard. "Yes," Catalina agreed. "It does." Because if the Eastern Consortium was sending weaponized Calestis assassins, it meant they were more desperate than anyone had realized. It meant the game had evolved beyond simple political maneuvering. It meant war was coming. And for the first time in her life, Catalina wasn't afraid of the fight. Chapter 10. The Council divided. The emergency council meeting convened in the great hall before the sun had fully risen. Catalina sat at Lucien's right hand, acutely aware of every gaze fixed upon her. 3 hours ago, she'd been a newly awakened queen trying to figure out basic protocol. Now she was the target of supernatural assassins and the center of a political storm that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. The assembled nobles were a mixture of Lucien's closest advisors and the visiting alpha sovereigns who'd come for the autumn convergence. Their emotions hit her in waves: suspicion, fear, calculation, and underneath it all, the sharp scent of ambition. "Let me understand this correctly," said Alpha Sovereign Reyes from the Northern Territories, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "A Calestis assassin, one who could mimic supernatural abilities, was sent specifically to kill your queen, and your response was to adopt him as family?" The emphasis he placed on the word queen made it clear exactly what he thought of her elevation. "Our response," Lucien said carefully, "was to free a mind-controlled slave and gain valuable intelligence about our enemy's capabilities." "Intelligence?" Duke Mendoza scoffed. "Lucien, the boy is clearly still compromised. For all we know, this was an elaborate ploy to place a weapon directly in our midst." Through her empathic senses, Catalina felt the truth of Miguel's condition like a steady heartbeat. The healing she'd performed hadn't been perfect. His mind was still fragmented, his memories incomplete. But the core of his being was human again. Wounded, confused, but undeniably real. "He's not compromised," she said quietly. "I can sense his emotional state clearly. The conditioning is broken." "And we're supposed to trust your word on that?" This from Alpha Sovereign Chen of the Eastern Valleys, a sharp-faced woman whose distrust radiated like heat from a forge. "Forgive me, but you've been awakened for less than a day. How could you possibly know—" "Because," Catalina interrupted, standing slowly. I know what it feels like to have your mind controlled. I know what it's like to be shaped into something that serves others' purposes. And I know what freedom feels like when it finally comes." The room fell silent. Even Chen looked taken aback by the quiet authority in her voice. "The question isn't whether Miguel can be trusted," Catalina continued. "The question is why the Eastern Consortium has weaponized Calestis abilities, and what they plan to do with them." "Exactly," said Healer Marin from her position near the wall. All eyes turned to the elderly woman as she stepped forward. "I've completed my examination of the boy. The conditioning he underwent is unlike anything I've seen, far more sophisticated than simple suppression collars." She moved to the center of the room, her medical bag in hand. "They didn't just suppress his abilities, they rewired them, turned his empathic gifts into a supernatural mirroring system. He can copy and counter any alpha ability he encounters. One assassin with that capability is concerning," Alpha Sovereign Reyes admitted. "But if they have more, they do." Everyone turned toward the new voice. Miguel stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards and wearing simple clothes that made him look far younger than his probable 20-odd years. His brown eyes were clearer than they'd been during the attack, but Catalina could still sense the fragility in his mind. "Miguel," Lucian said carefully, "you should be resting." "I remember things," the young man said, stepping into the room with obvious effort. "Not everything, but enough. They have 12 others like me. Maybe more." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 12? Chen breathed. "Calestis children taken young, broken, rebuilt." Miguel's voice was mechanical as he recited the facts, but Catalina could feel the pain underneath each word. "Different specializations. I was designed for alpha mimicry. Others copy beta abilities, omega gifts, even rare bloodlines like—" His gaze found Catalina. "Like starlight healing. They have assassins specifically designed to counter healing abilities?" Marin's face had gone pale. "Not counter. Copy. They can steal your healing gift and use it for harm, turn medicine into poison, soothing into agony." Miguel swayed slightly, and one of his guards moved to steady him. "That's why they sent me first, to test the Queen's abilities before deploying specialized counters." The implications hit the room like a physical blow. If the Consortium could field assassins who perfectly countered their target's abilities, no supernatural bloodline in the kingdom was safe. "This is what comes of elevating slaves," Duke Mendoza said harshly, though his anger seemed directed more at the situation than at Catalina specifically. "We've painted a target on every noble family in the 7 territories." "No," Catalina said firmly. "This is what comes of a system that creates slaves in the first place. The Consortium didn't start hunting Calestis bloodlines yesterday, Uncle. They've been doing it for decades." The familial address felt strange on her tongue, but technically accurate now that she'd made it into the family. "The only difference is that now we know about it." "She's right," said a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Alpha Sovereign Valdez of the Western Marshes, a quiet man who rarely spoke in councils but commanded respect when he did. "My territory has lost 3 families with unusual bloodlines in the past 5 years. Officially, they were recorded as deaths from plague or bandit attacks." "Same in the southern valleys," admitted Alpha Sovereign Torres. 2 Calestis families, 1 line of storm speakers, and a family rumored to carry berserker blood. All dead under suspicious circumstances. The pattern was undeniable. The Consortium hadn't just been taking individual slaves, they'd been systematically genociding supernatural bloodlines across the kingdom. "So, what do we do?" Chen asked bluntly. "We can't fight enemies who can perfectly counter our abilities?" "We can," Catalina said, and felt every eye in the room focus on her. "But not the way we've been fighting." "Meaning?" She took a breath, drawing on the growing confidence she felt through her bond with Lucienne. "Meaning we stop thinking like nobles and start thinking like people who've learned to survive impossible odds." The silence stretched until Duke Mendoza finally spoke. Elaborate. You're all thinking about this as a military problem, how to field your forces against theirs, how to counter their advantages with superior strength or numbers. But that's not how you fight an enemy who can adapt to anything you throw at them. She began pacing, the movement helping her organize thoughts that were still forming. You fight them by being unpredictable, by using the one thing they can't copy or counter, genuine human connection. I don't follow, Reyes said. The conditioning works by exploiting the Kylestis gift for empathy. It turns our ability to understand and connect with others into a weapon for mimicry. But it has a weakness. It can only copy what it understands as a discrete ability. Miguel nodded slowly. The assassins are trained to identify and mirror specific supernatural gifts, alpha strength, omega persuasion, beta coordination. But they're not trained to handle complexity, Catalina continued. Multiple abilities working in concert, powers augmented by genuine emotion instead of cold calculation, and they're definitely not trained to handle someone who refuses to fight them at all. The room was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. We don't beat them by being stronger. We beat them by being more human than they remember how to be. It was a dangerous gamble, betting everything on the theory that enough humanity remained in the weaponized Kylestis to be reached. But as Catalina looked around the room, she saw understanding dawn on several faces. You want to try to turn them, Lucian said softly. Like you did with Miguel. I want to save them, she corrected. All of them. Because that's what family does. Duke Mendoza shook his head. It's too risky. If you're wrong... If I'm wrong, we're no worse off than we would be fighting a conventional war against superior forces, Catalina replied. But if I'm right... If you're right, Alpha Sovereign Valdez said slowly, we might actually have a chance. The vote, when it came, was closer than she'd hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 4 territories in favor of her plan, 2 opposed, 1 abstaining. As the council dispersed to prepare for what might be the strangest war in the kingdom's history, Catalina felt Lucian's hand find hers. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. She thought about Elena, still recovering from her shock collar wounds. About Miguel, struggling to remember his own name. About all the Kylestis children who'd been taken, broken, and rebuilt as weapons. I'm sure, she said. For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure. Because this wasn't just about stopping the consortium anymore. This was about healing a kingdom that had forgotten how to value the people it was supposed to protect. And she was exactly the right person for that job. Chapter 11. The Underground Network. Elena was waiting in the servants' quarters when Catalina returned from the council meeting. The girl sat on her narrow cot, hands folded in her lap, but her eyes tracked every movement as Catalina entered the familiar space. It felt strange being here now, like visiting a museum of her former life. They're talking about you in the kitchens, Elena said without preamble. Half think you're a miracle. The other half think you're going to get us all killed. Catalina settled onto her old cot, noting how the thin mattress felt impossibly uncomfortable after just one night in royal chambers. What do you think? I think, Elena said carefully, that you're about to ask me to do something dangerous. Through her empathic senses, Catalina could feel the girl's mixture of fear and excitement. Elena wanted to help, wanted to be part of something bigger than scrubbing floors and dodging shock collars, but she also understood that involvement meant risk. I need to know about the other servants, Catalina said, specifically the ones who've been here longer than most. The ones who see and hear everything but stay invisible. You want to build a spy network. I want to build a communication network. There's a difference. Catalina leaned forward, speaking quietly despite the privacy wards Lucien had insisted on placing around the room. The consortium has been operating in our territory for years, Elena. They've been taking people, targeting bloodlines, and somehow they've been doing it without the noble families noticing. Because they don't take from the noble families, Elena said bitterly. They take from people like us, Servants, farmers, crafters, people whose disappearances don't matter to anyone in power. The truth of it hit Catalina like a physical blow. The systematic genocide Miguel had described hadn't targeted the ruling class. It had targeted the most vulnerable members of society. The invisible people who kept the kingdom running, but had no voice in its governance. That changes now, Catalina said firmly. But I need information. I need to know who's gone missing, when, and from where. I need to map their operation. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Catalina's face. You really mean it, don't you? About changing things. I mean it. Then you should know. There's already a network. Has been for years. Catalina's heart stopped. What? Did you think we just accepted it? When our families disappeared, our friends vanished in the night? Elena's voice carried a bitter edge. We've been tracking them, trying to figure out the pattern. We just never had anyone in power who would listen. How many of you are there? In this palace? Maybe 20 servants who are part of the network, but it extends further, to other households, other territories. Servants talk to each other, my lady. We carry messages, share information. We see everything the nobility misses. The implications were staggering. While the noble families had been playing their political games, an entire underground intelligence network had been operating right under their noses. Cataloging disappearances, tracking patterns, gathering evidence that no one in authority had bothered to request. I need to meet with them, Catalina said. Tonight. Dear goddess, Catalina whispered. Your goddess didn't help them, the elderly woman said sharply. But maybe you can. The question is, what are you offering? Catalina took a breath, thinking of Lucian waiting for her in their chambers, of the political battles ahead, of the comfortable life she could choose if she simply focused on being a good queen and left the difficult work to others. Then she thought of Miguel's broken sobs, of Elena's shock collar scars, of 43 families who would never see their loved ones again. Everything, she said simply. Access to royal resources, legal protection for network members, and a voice in the highest levels of government. In exchange, I want complete intelligence sharing and coordination of rescue efforts. Rescue efforts? This from a middle-aged man near the back. My lady, most of the taken don't survive the conditioning process, and those who do, they're not the same people anymore. Miguel survived it. I helped break his conditioning. If I can do it for one, I can do it for others. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Hope warring with skepticism, desperation fighting against years of learned helplessness. Finally, the elderly woman raised her hand for silence. I'm Martha Flores. I've been running this network for 8 years, ever since my grandson disappeared. If you're serious about this partnership, really serious, then you need to understand something. What? We don't just gather information. We rescue who we can, we relocate families under threat, and we fight back when we have to. Sometimes that means breaking laws. Sometimes it means defying direct orders from nobility. Martha's eyes were steel. Are you prepared for that, Queen Catalina? The title sounded different when Martha said it. Not mocking, but testing. A challenge to prove she could be both royal and real. I'm prepared for whatever it takes to stop this, Catalina replied. But I need you to be prepared for something too. Which is? This partnership goes both ways. If I'm giving you access to royal resources, I need your word that major operations will be coordinated through me. I won't have network members taking unnecessary risks because of poor planning. Martha smiled for the first time since Catalina had entered the room. Fair enough, but understand, we've been doing this without you for years. We don't need a savior. We need an ally. Then you have one. The handshake that sealed their agreement was firm, businesslike, and the beginning of something that would change the kingdom's power structure forever. As the meeting dispersed, and Catalina made her way back through the palace's hidden passages, she realized that her real education as queen was just beginning. Because leading nobles was one thing, building a coalition of the powerless was something else entirely. And it might just be the most important work of her life. Chapter 12. The Map of Ghosts. The war room had been transformed overnight. Where yesterday ornate maps of territorial boundaries had decorated the walls, now Martha's network had covered every surface with a different kind of cartography. Hand-drawn charts marked with symbols only they understood. Red pins for confirmed disappearances, black pins for suspected consortium operations, yellow pins for families relocated to safety. Looking at it all, Catalina felt sick. "Dear goddess," Lucian breathed from beside her. "I had no idea the scope was this extensive." Martha stood at the center of the room like a general surveying a battlefield. Around her, a dozen network members worked with quiet efficiency, updating locations, cross-referencing testimonies, building the most comprehensive intelligence map the kingdom had ever seen. "This is just what we know about," Martha said without looking up from a ledger thick with names. "Every entry represents someone who had family or friends brave enough to report them missing. Imagine how many more we never heard about." Miguel sat at a smaller table, his face pale but determined as he worked through his recovered memories. Each detail he provided added another piece to the horrifying puzzle: safe houses, transport routes, conditioning facilities. "The main processing center is here," he said, pointing to a location in the Eastern Consortium's territory. "But they have smaller facilities scattered across neutral zones, places where they can work without territorial oversight." "How many people are currently held at these locations?" Duke Mendoza asked. He'd arrived an hour ago and had spent most of that time staring at the maps in stunned silence. "Based on the intake schedule, I remember maybe 60 to 80 at any given time. But the turnover is high." Miguel's voice went flat. "Many don't survive the initial conditioning." The room went quiet. Around the tables, network members paused in their work, and Catalina felt the weight of collective grief settle over everyone like a shroud. "How long does the conditioning process take?" she asked gently. "For basic compliance? 3 months? For specialized weapon training like mine? 2 years." Miguel met her eyes. "The longer programs have higher survival rates, but the subjects who emerge are less recoverable." Less recoverable. Such clinical language for the systematic destruction of human souls. "We need to prioritize recent acquisitions," Catalina said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "People who've been taken in the last few months might still be in early conditioning phases." "Agreed," Martha said, making notes. "But we also need to be realistic about our capabilities. The network has been focused on intelligence gathering and family relocation. We're not equipped for large-scale military rescue operations." "Which is why we're not approaching this as a military operation," Catalina replied. "We're approaching it as a recovery mission." She moved to the largest map, studying the marked locations. "Miguel, these smaller facilities, how heavily guarded are they?" "Depends on the location. The ones in neutral territory rely more on secrecy than security. Maybe a dozen guards, basic magical protections." "And the guards? Are they consortium agents or local hires?" Miguel considered this. "Mix of both. The consortium brings their own people for specialized roles, but they hire locally for basic security to avoid drawing attention." Catalina felt a plan beginning to form. What if we didn't assault these facilities at all? What if we convinced them to let us in? "I don't follow," Mendoza said. "The consortium thinks they broke me and sent me home as a weapon," Miguel said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "If I return to report mission success—" "They'd trust you enough to let you back into their facilities," Catalina finished. "With proper backup, you could evacuate recent captives before anyone realized what was happening." "Absolutely not." Lucian's voice cut across the room like a blade. "I won't let you put Miguel back in their hands. The psychological trauma alone would be worth it to save 60 lives," Miguel said quietly. "Your Majesty, with respect, this is my choice to make." Through her empathic connection, Catalina felt the complex tangle of Miguel's emotions: fear, determination, guilt, and underneath it all, a desperate need to balance the scales for what he'd been forced to do. "Miguel," she said gently, "you don't owe anyone redemption. You were a victim, not a willing participant." "I know that here," he said, tapping his temple. "But knowing it and feeling it are different things. Every night I dream about the people I hurt while under conditioning. Let me do something that helps instead of harms." Martha looked up from her ledger. "The boy has a point. And it's not like we'd be sending him alone. My network has people positioned near several of these facilities. With proper coordination, we could extract significant numbers." "It's still incredibly dangerous," Healer Marin said from her position near the medical charts. "If the conditioning isn't as broken as we think, if there are hidden triggers we missed, then I'll be there to break them again," Catalina said simply. The room erupted. "Absolutely not!" Lucian's alpha authority filled the air like thunder. "Catalina, you are not going anywhere near a consortium facility." "You can't order me not to go," she replied calmly. "I'm your mate, not your subordinate. You're also the primary target. They sent an assassin specifically to kill you, which is exactly why this plan will work." She turned to face the room, addressing everyone at once. "They think I'm dead. Miguel was supposed to confirm the kill and return. If I'm there when he reports back, hidden but present, I can break the conditioning on every Caelestis they're holding." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Martha spoke. "It could work. The psychological shock of seeing their successful assassin arrive with his supposed victim might create enough confusion to give us an advantage. Or it could trigger security protocols that get everyone killed," Mendoza countered. "Everything we do from now on carries that risk," Catalina said. "The consortium knows we're aware of them. They'll be adapting their operations, increasing security, probably accelerating their timetables. If we're going to save anyone, it has to be soon." Miguel nodded slowly. "She's right. The longer we wait, the more people die." "I need time to think about this," Lucian said. But Catalina could feel his conflicted emotions through their bond. He knew she was right, but every protective instinct in his body rebelled against putting her in danger. "While you're thinking," Martha said, "we'll continue mapping and planning. But understand, with or without official approval, my network is moving forward. Too many lives are at stake to wait for consensus." As the meeting dispersed, Catalina found herself alone with Lucian in the suddenly quiet war room. The map surrounding them seemed to pulse with the weight of all those missing lives. "I have to do this," she said softly. "I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "That doesn't mean I have to like it. I survived 15 years as a slave. I survived magical suppression that should have broken my mind. I survived yesterday's assassination attempt." She moved closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Trust me to survive this too. It's not about trusting you. It's about—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I just found you. The thought of losing you now. You won't lose me." She stood on her toes to kiss him gently. "But if we don't act, we'll lose ourselves. How can we build a kingdom worth ruling if we're not willing to fight for the people who need us most?" Through their bond, she felt his walls crumble. His arms came around her, holding her close as he finally accepted what they both knew to be true. Tomorrow, they would attempt the most dangerous rescue mission in the kingdom's history. Tonight, they would hold each other and pretend that love was enough to keep them safe, even though they both knew better. Chapter 13. Into the Belly of the Beast. The consortium facility looked like an abandoned grain warehouse from the outside. Catalina crouched behind a line of scraggly pine trees, studying the seemingly innocuous building through a spyglass. No banners, no obvious guards, nothing to suggest that inside those weathered walls, human beings were being systematically broken and rebuilt into weapons. "Remember," Martha whispered from beside her. "We have exactly 30 minutes once Miguel goes inside. Any longer and the local patrols will notice the disruption. 30 minutes to save as many lives as possible." It felt impossibly short and terrifyingly long at the same time. Through the bond, Catalina felt Lucian's tension like a physical weight. He was positioned with the main extraction team a quarter-mile away, ready to provide heavy support if things went wrong. The separation was strategic and agonizing for both of them. "Signal from the perimeter team," whispered Jonas, one of Martha's scouts. "All external guards are accounted for. Miguel's clear to approach." Catalina watched through the spyglass as Miguel emerged from the tree line, moving with the mechanical precision of his conditioning. To anyone observing, he would look exactly like the successful assassin returning to report mission completion. The performance was flawless and heartbreaking. "I can feel his fear from here," she murmured. "Good," Martha said pragmatically. "Fear keeps you alive in situations like this." Miguel reached the warehouse entrance and gave some kind of coded knock. The door opened, revealing a guard who looked both bored and relieved. They exchanged words, too distant to hear, but Miguel's body language suggested he was delivering the expected report. He disappeared inside. "Phase 1 complete," Jonas reported through the communication crystal. "Moving to Phase 2. Now came the hard part. Catalina and 3 network members had to get inside without triggering any security protocols, locate the holding cells, and begin breaking conditioning on however many Calestis they found, all while Miguel kept the guards distracted with his debriefing. "Remember," Martha said as they prepared to move, "most of the captives will be disoriented, possibly hostile. The conditioning makes them see rescuers as threats." "I know." Catalina checked the medical supplies in her pack one more time. Healer Marin had provided sedatives, pain relievers, and a selection of herbs designed to help with magical suppression after effects. "How do we get them to trust us quickly enough to evacuate?" "We don't. We get them stable enough to move, then sort out trust issues later." The service entrance Miguel had identified was on the north side of the building, a simple door marked with a faded sign about deliveries. According to his memories, it led directly to the storage areas where new captives were kept during initial processing. Catalina felt a chill as they approached. The building itself seemed to radiate wrongness, not magical, but emotional. 15 years of human suffering had soaked into the very stones. Martha picked the lock with professional efficiency while Jonas kept watch. The door swung open silently, revealing a corridor lit by flickering magical torches. The smell hit them immediately. Unwashed bodies, fear, and underneath it all, the metallic scent of suppression collars. "This way," Catalina whispered, following the trail of suffering her empathic senses could detect like breadcrumbs. They passed several empty rooms before reaching what was clearly the main holding area. Through a barred window, Catalina could see maybe 20 people in various states of distress. Some sat in corners, rocking back and forth. Others paced like caged animals. A few lay motionless on thin pallets, their eyes vacant. All wore the distinctive black collars of consortium suppression gear. "Goddess help us," breathed Sarah, one of the network members. "Can you break this many collar spells at once?" Martha asked quietly. Catalina studied the scene, her heart breaking at the sight of so much systematic cruelty. "I don't know, but I have to try." The lock on the holding cell was magical rather than mechanical, a swirling pattern of energy that would shock anyone without proper authorization. But Catalina's awakened abilities included more than just empathy. The same power that had shattered her own collar reached out to analyze the spell structure. "Simple binding," she murmured, "designed to contain, not to kill." She placed her hands on the lock, feeling the magical pathways like a puzzle to be solved. There. The energy pattern dissolved, and the cell door swung open. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Several captives scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the far wall. Others stood and moved forward aggressively, their conditioning interpreting the open door as some kind of test or trap. "Stay back," Martha warned her team. "Let Catalina work." But Catalina was already moving into the cell, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "My name is Catalina," she said in the calmest voice she could manage. "I'm here to help you go home." A young woman, maybe Elena's age, laughed bitterly. "Home? This is home now. This is all there is." The despair in her voice was heartbreaking, but Catalina pushed forward. "What's your name?" "Names are for people. I'm Unit 7. Unit 7. They'd stripped away even her identity. "No," Catalina said firmly, stepping closer despite the girl's flinch. "You're someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. You have a name and a life and people who miss you." "You're lying," Unit 7 said, but her voice wavered. "I'm not." Catalina reached out slowly, telegraphing every movement. "May I touch your collar? I can make the pain stop." The girl's eyes widened, the first sign of real emotion Catalina had seen. "You can't! No one can! It's permanent!" "Watch me." Catalina's fingers found the collar's surface, and immediately she felt the magical suppression like ice water in her veins. But this time, she was ready for it. Instead of fighting the spell, she followed its pathways, understanding how it worked before systematically dismantling it. The collar cracked. Unit 7 gasped, her hands flying to her throat. I can feel..." Tears started streaming down her face. "My name is Rosa Santos. Santos, Miguel's sister." "Rosa," Catalina said gently, "your brother is here. He's part of the rescue team." "Miguel?" Rosa's voice broke. "But they said he was dead. They lied about a lot of things." Behind Rosa, other captives were stirring, hope beginning to pierce through the fog of conditioning. Catalina moved among them, breaking collar after collar, watching personalities emerge from the shells the consortium had tried to create. "Time check," Martha called softly from the doorway. 15 minutes remaining," Jonas replied. 15 minutes to get 20 traumatized people ready to move. It wasn't enough time, but it would have to be. "Listen to me," Catalina announced to the group. "In about 10 minutes, my friends are going to help you leave this place. I know you're scared. I know you don't know what to believe, but right now, you need to trust me long enough to get to safety." "What about the others?" asked a middle-aged man whose collar had just been removed. "There are more facilities, more people like us. We'll come back for them," Catalina promised. "All of them." "You can't save everyone," Rosa said quietly. "Maybe not. But I can save you. Today. Right now." Catalina met each person's eyes in turn. "Will you let me try?" The silence stretched until, finally, Rosa nodded. "Yes." One by one, the others agreed. As they prepared to move toward the extraction point, Catalina felt a surge of desperate hope. 20 lives saved. 20 families reunited. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was a start. Then the alarms began to wail. "Miguel's been compromised," Jonas reported, his voice tight with fear. "Guards are moving toward the main facility. We need to go now." Through the bond, Catalina felt Lucian's answering alarm as he prepared to move his team into position, but they were still minutes away, and the guards were already inside the building. "Move," Martha commanded. "Everyone toward the north exit." As they hurried through the corridors with their rescued group, Catalina heard the sound of fighting from deeper in the building. Miguel was buying them time, but at what cost? They burst through the service door into the gray dawn light, 20 freed captives stumbling behind them like refugees from a nightmare. In the distance, Catalina could see Lucien's team racing toward them across the open ground. Almost there. Almost safe. Then she heard Miguel scream. The sound cut through her like a blade, carrying pain and terror that her empathic abilities amplified until she nearly collapsed. Through the building's walls, she felt his agony as the guards activated some kind of punishment device. "Keep moving!" Martha shouted, but Catalina was already turning back toward the warehouse. "I'm not leaving him!" "Catalina, no!" But she was already running, power blazing from her skin like starlight as she prepared to face whatever horrors waited inside. Because that's what family did. They came back for each other, no matter the cost. Chapter 14. The Breaking Point. The warehouse interior had transformed into a battlefield. Catalina burst through the service door to find Miguel backed against a wall, blood streaming from a dozen wounds while 3 guards advanced on him with shock rods crackling with electricity. His eyes were wild with pain and barely contained fury. The careful control they'd worked so hard to build was fracturing under torture. "Stop," she commanded, and her voice carried such authority that the guards actually paused. That moment of hesitation was all she needed. Power exploded from her like a supernova. Not the controlled healing she'd been learning, but raw, primal energy fueled by protective rage. The shock rods shattered in the guards' hands. The suppression field generators lining the walls cracked and died. Every piece of consortium technology in the building simply ceased to function. "Impossible," one of the guards breathed. "The containment fields are gone," Catalina finished, golden light blazing from her skin. "Along with any authority you think you have here." The lead guard, a scarred woman with the cold eyes of a career torturer, reached for a backup weapon. "You're the target, the Calestis Queen. Do you have any idea what you're worth to our employers?" "Less than nothing," Catalina replied. "But let me show you what I'm worth to myself." She reached out with her empathic abilities, not to heal this time, but to understand. The guard's mind was a maze of careful conditioning, layers of loyalty programming designed to override natural human empathy. But underneath all that artificial structure, Catalina found something unexpected. A terrified child who'd been taken, broken, and rebuilt, just like Miguel. Just like all of them. "Your name is Catherine Reeves," she said softly. "You were 8 when they took you from the northern fishing village. Your parents died trying to protect you." The guard's eyes went wide. "How could you possibly—" "Because I can see past what they made you into." Catalina stepped closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "They turned your gift for reading emotions into a tool for inflicting them. But that's not who you really are." "Stop," the guard whispered, but her weapon hand was shaking. "You used to heal injured seabirds. You wanted to be a veterinarian." Catalina's voice was gentle but relentless. "They made you forget. But the kindness is still there. Buried, but not destroyed." Behind the guard, her companions were backing away, unsure how to handle a situation that had spiraled completely outside their training parameters. "I can help you remember," Catalina offered. "All of you. This doesn't have to be how your story ends." For a moment, hope flickered in Catherine's eyes. Then her face went blank and she raised her weapon again. "Nice try," she said in a voice that had gone flat and mechanical. "But some of us are too broken to fix." The weapon fired, not at Catalina, but at herself. "No!" Catalina lunged forward, but she was too late. Catherine collapsed, a smile of terrible peace on her face as life faded from her eyes. The other guards used the distraction to flee, leaving Catalina kneeling beside the body of a woman who'd chosen death over the possibility of healing. "She was too far gone," Miguel said quietly from behind her. His voice was rough with pain, but he was moving under his own power. "Some of us can't come back from what they did to us." "Everyone can come back," Catalina said fiercely. "Everyone deserves the chance to come back." "Do they?" Miguel gestured toward the empty corridor where the other guards had fled. "How many people did Catherine torture? How many lives did she destroy while wearing that uniform? At what point does the damage you've done become unforgivable?" The question hit harder than any physical blow. Through the bond, she felt Lucien's team approaching the building, but their rescue felt distant compared to the immediate weight of Miguel's words. "Redemption isn't about deserving," she said finally. "It's about choosing to be better than what was done to you." And what if you can't? What if the programming goes too deep, the damage too extensive? Miguel's eyes were haunted. What if some of us are too dangerous to save? Before she could answer, footsteps echoed through the corridor. Lucien appeared with 6 armed guards, his face tight with worry that dissolved into relief when he saw her. "The extraction is complete," he reported. "All 20 captives are secure and en route to the healing facilities. But we need to move. Consortium reinforcements are 10 minutes out." Catalina stood slowly, taking one last look at Catherine's peaceful face. "We can't leave her here. My lady, there's no time. We don't leave our people behind," she said firmly. "Not even the ones who couldn't find their way home." 2 of Lucien's guards lifted Catherine's body while Miguel gathered intelligence documents from the facility's office. As they prepared to evacuate, Catalina made a silent promise to the woman who died believing herself beyond salvation. "This won't happen again. Whatever it takes, I won't let them break anyone else beyond the possibility of healing." But even as she made the vow, doubt gnawed at her. Catherine's question echoed in her mind. At what point does the damage become unforgivable? And more troubling, what if Miguel was right? What if some people really were too broken to save? Chapter 15. The Reckoning. The debriefing took place in the palace's secure wing, with magical privacy wards so strong they made the air itself feel heavy. Around the table sat the key players in what was already being called the Consortium War: Lucien, Duke Mendoza, Martha, Healer Marin, and Miguel. At the center of it all sat 21 files, one for each person they'd rescued, plus Catherine's. "Preliminary examination confirms what Miguel told us," Marin reported, her voice clinically professional despite the horror of her findings. "All 20 survivors show signs of systematic magical and psychological conditioning. The techniques used are sophisticated and cruel." "How sophisticated?" Mendoza asked. "They've essentially created a technology for personality modification, layer upon layer of behavioral programming, reinforced with magical compulsions and triggered by specific stimuli." Marin's hands trembled slightly as she turned pages in her report. "Some of the subjects have artificial memories that feel completely real to them." Artificial memories. The implications were staggering. "How many of their own experiences do they actually remember?" Catalina asked. "It varies. Rosa Santos retained most of her childhood memories, probably because her conditioning was interrupted early. But some of the others..." Marin shook her head. "I'm not sure we can fully restore what was lost." Miguel had been quiet throughout the briefing, but now he spoke up. "Doctor, what about sleeper programming? Are any of them carrying hidden instructions? That's what we're testing for now. But Miguel, the fact that you thought to ask that question suggests your own recovery isn't as complete as we hoped." All eyes turned to Miguel, who was staring at his hands with an expression of growing horror. "I've been having dreams, memories that don't feel like mine. And sometimes..." He looked up at Catalina. "Sometimes when I look at you, I feel this urge to complete the mission." The room went dead silent. "Miguel," Lucien said carefully, "are you saying you're still experiencing homicidal urges toward my mate?" "Not urges. Instructions. Like a voice in the back of my head reminding me what I was made to do." Miguel's voice was steady, but Catalina could feel his terror through her empathic senses. "It's getting stronger." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Mendoza demanded. "Because I thought I could control it. And because..." Miguel met Catalina's eyes. "Because I was afraid you'd lock me up. Or kill me." "We're not going to kill you," Catalina said firmly. "Maybe you should." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, the assembled leaders wrestled with an impossible question. What do you do with someone who wants to be saved but might be too dangerous to save? "There has to be another way," Catalina said desperately. Some kind of deeper healing, a way to root out the programming entirely. The risk is enormous, Marin warned. Attempting to remove conditioning that extensive could cause complete psychological collapse. We could lose him entirely. As opposed to losing him to homicidal programming? As opposed to him losing himself trying to fight programming that might be unbeatable. Catalina felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Save Miguel and risk him becoming a weapon again? Leave him as he was and watch him slowly lose his humanity? Attempt a cure that might destroy his mind entirely? "What do you want, Miguel?" she asked quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to stop being afraid of what I might do. I want to look at you and see my queen instead of my target. I want..." His voice broke. "I want to be human again." "Then we try," Catalina said simply. "The council won't approve it," Mendoza warned. "Not with everything else happening. The political situation is too volatile to risk having a potentially compromised assassin in the palace." "Then we don't ask the council." Lucian's head snapped toward her. "Catalina, this is a medical decision, not a political one. Miguel is a patient, not a prisoner." She stood, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made an unshakable decision. "Dr. Marin, how long would the procedure take? If we attempt complete conditioning removal, days, maybe weeks, and that's assuming it works at all." "Do it. My lady, the risk is mine to take." Catalina looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "All of you seem to forget that I was conditioned too. Maybe not as extensively as Miguel, but for 15 years I lived with magical programming designed to make me invisible, compliant, forgettable." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the faded marks where her suppression collar had rested. "Every day I wore that collar, it was rewriting my neural pathways, making me believe I was less than human. If someone hadn't been willing to risk healing me, I'd still be scrubbing floors and believing I deserved nothing better." "That's different," Mendoza protested. "Your conditioning was about suppression, not violence. The principle is the same. Everyone deserves the chance to be whole." Catalina's voice grew stronger with each word. "And if we start deciding that some people are too broken to save, where does it end? How long before we're making those same calculations about anyone who doesn't fit our definition of recoverable?" The room fell silent. In that quiet, Catalina felt something shift, not just in the assembled leaders, but in herself. This wasn't just about Miguel anymore. This was about the kind of kingdom they were building, the kind of people they wanted to be. "I'll need a team," Marin said finally. "Healers experienced with trauma therapy, magical specialists who understand conditioning techniques. You'll have whatever you need," Lucian said quietly. "And security," Mendoza added. "If something goes wrong during the procedure..." "Nothing will go wrong," Catalina said with absolute certainty. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'll be there the entire time. If the programming tries to activate, I'll be ready to counter it." She turned to Miguel. "That is, if you're willing to trust me that deeply." Miguel's smile was the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him. "My lady, you've already saved my life twice. I think I can trust you to save my soul." As the meeting adjourned and plans were made for the most ambitious healing attempt in the kingdom's history, Catalina felt a familiar warmth in her chest. Not the bond with Lucian, though that remained strong and steady. This was something else. The glow of purpose, of knowing with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Some battles were fought with swords and magic. Others were fought with compassion and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved a chance at redemption, and she was just getting started with both kinds of war. Chapter 16. The Healing War. The procedure began at dawn. Miguel lay on a specially prepared bed in the palace's deepest healing chamber, surrounded by more magical protections than most treasuries boasted. 7 healers formed a circle around him, each specializing in different aspects of trauma recovery. At the head of the bed, Catalina sat with her hands resting on his temples, ready to dive into the labyrinth of his damaged mind. "Remember," Healer Marin said quietly, "we're not trying to erase what was done to him. We're trying to separate his true memories from the artificial ones, his real personality from the programmed responses." "Like untangling two different tapestries that have been woven together," added Master Healer Chen, an elderly woman borrowed from the Northern Territories. "If we pull too hard, we risk destroying both." Catalina nodded, though her attention was already focused inward. Through her empathic connection with Miguel, she could feel the chaotic storm of his consciousness, fragments of childhood love mixed with artificial hatred, genuine memories overlaid with programmed responses. "Begin the sedation," she said softly. As the calming herbs took effect, Miguel's surface thoughts quieted, allowing Catalina to go deeper. What she found there made her stomach clench. The consortium's conditioning wasn't just programming, it was architecture. They'd built an entire false personality structure and grafted it onto Miguel's original self like a parasite. Every genuine emotion had been paired with an artificial counter-response. Every natural impulse had been rewired to serve their purposes. Worse, the artificial personality was designed to fight back. The moment Catalina began examining the programming, she felt it respond. Not passively, but with active hostility. The false memories began asserting themselves more strongly, trying to overwhelm Miguel's real personality entirely. "He's seizing," one of the healers reported. Through the bond, Catalina felt Miguel's terror as his own mind turned against him. The programming was trying to activate termination protocols. Better to kill the subject than lose control of him. "Hold him steady," she commanded, pouring more of her power into the connection. "I'm going in deeper." She dove past the surface programming into the core of Miguel's psyche, where his original personality had been buried, but not destroyed. There, in the deepest parts of his mind, she found the 8-year-old boy who'd loved his sister and healed injured birds. But she also found something else, a trap. The consortium had anticipated rescue attempts. Hidden in the deepest layer of conditioning was a final safeguard, a magical bomb designed to destroy Miguel's entire personality if anyone tried to remove the programming. "There's a kill switch," she announced, her voice tight with concentration. "If I trigger it—" "We lost him completely," Marin finished. "Can you disarm it?" "I don't know. It's tied into everything, every memory, every emotion. If I make one wrong move—" Through their connection, she felt Miguel's awareness surface just enough for him to understand what was happening. "Do it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Better to die free than live as their weapon." "No," Catalina said fiercely. "There's always another way." But even as she said it, she could feel the programming adapting, becoming more aggressive. The artificial personality was gathering strength, preparing to launch a final assault on Miguel's consciousness. That's when the inspiration struck. Instead of fighting the false personality, what if she gave it what it wanted? "Everyone hold position," she announced. "I'm going to try something." She stopped resisting the programming and instead opened herself to it completely. The artificial memories flooded into her mind. Years of conditioning, training, systematic brutality designed to create the perfect weapon. But Catalina had one advantage the consortium hadn't planned for. She'd lived through her own conditioning. She knew what it felt like to have your sense of self systematically destroyed and rebuilt. More importantly, she knew what it felt like to break free. As the false personality tried to overwhelm her with its programmed responses, she met it not with resistance but with understanding. She felt the loneliness of the artificial construct, created to hate but never to love, to kill but never to heal. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "You can choose differently." The programming faltered, confused by her lack of opposition. "You were made to be a weapon," she continued, "but weapons can be reforged. Hatred can be transformed into protection. Violence can become strength used to defend rather than destroy. She felt the artificial personality waver, its certainty cracking in the face of unexpected compassion. "Join with him instead of fighting him," she offered. "Become part of who he is instead of trying to replace him. Use your strength to protect what he loves instead of destroying it." For a moment, the programming resisted. Then, slowly, impossibly, she felt it begin to change. The artificial hatred transformed into protective instincts. The programmed violence became a controlled strength. The false memories integrated with real ones, creating something new. Not the original Miguel, not the consortium's weapon, but someone who was both and neither. "It's working," one of the healers breathed. Miguel's eyes opened, clear and focused for the first time since Catalina had known him. "I remember everything," he said wonderingly. "The real memories and the false ones, but I can tell the difference now." "How do you feel?" Catalina asked, exhausted from the mental battle, but hopeful. He sat up slowly, testing his reactions. "Like myself, but stronger. The programming is still there, but it's mine now, under my control instead of controlling me." "And the mission imperatives?" Miguel looked at her directly, and for the first time she felt no echo of homicidal intent from him. Gone. Completely gone. The healing chamber erupted in quiet celebration as the medical team confirmed what Catalina already knew through her empathic senses. Miguel was free. Not just suppressed or contained, but genuinely healed. "How did you know that would work?" Marin asked as they prepared to transfer Miguel to recovery. "I didn't," Catalina admitted. "But I've learned that the most powerful healing happens when you stop fighting the damage and start transforming it into something better." As word of the successful procedure spread through the palace, Catalina felt a shift in the political atmosphere. What had been seen as a dangerous experiment was now being hailed as a breakthrough that could change everything. Because if they could heal one weaponized Calestis, they could heal them all. The war against the consortium had just taken on an entirely new dimension. Instead of simply stopping their enemies, they were going to save them. Chapter 17. The Alliance forms news of Miguel's successful healing spread across the 7 territories like wildfire. Within 3 days, Catalina found herself hosting an unprecedented gathering in the palace's Great Hall. Representatives from every major territory had arrived, but not just the usual alpha nobility. For the first time in living memory, betas, omegas, and even freed servants sat at the same table as territorial leaders. "This changes everything," declared Alpha Sovereign Reyes, studying the detailed medical reports spread before him. "If we can reliably reverse consortium conditioning, we can turn their own weapons against them," finished Alpha Chen, though her tone suggested she found the prospect distasteful. "No," Catalina said firmly from her position at the head of the table. "We don't turn people into weapons at all. That's the entire point." "With respect, Your Majesty," said Sovereign Torres, "these individuals have been trained as assassins. Their skills could be invaluable in the coming conflict. Their skills can be valuable in healing, in protection, in rebuilding what the consortium has destroyed." Catalina's voice carried the authority she'd learned to wield over the past weeks. "But we don't use people as tools of war. That's what makes us different from our enemies." Around the table, she could sense the complex web of emotions her words had stirred. Some agreed with her philosophy. Others saw her position as dangerously naive. A few were calculating how to use her principles to their own advantage. Duke Mendoza cleared his throat. "While the Queen's compassion is admirable, we need to be practical about the resources required for this healing program. The time, the specialized healers, the magical protections will be provided by a coalition of territories," interrupted a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Beta Counselor Hayes from the Eastern Valleys, a territory that had remained officially neutral in most political conflicts. Behind her stood representatives from 3 other traditionally neutral regions. "Counselor Hayes?" Lucian said, rising respectfully. This is unexpected. Recent events have made neutrality impossible, Hayes replied as she took a seat at the table. The consortium's activities affect all our territories. If Queen Catalina has found a way to heal their victims rather than simply executing them, we want to support that effort. The neutral territories are offering resources? Chen asked, clearly surprised. More than resources, we're offering sanctuary. Hayes spread a new map on the table, marking locations across the kingdoms. Healing facilities in secure locations, staffed by volunteers from our medical communities. The consortium has relied on fear and secrecy. We intend to create networks of hope and openness. Catalina felt tears prick her eyes. In just a few weeks, her desperate attempt to save one broken young man had grown into a movement spanning multiple territories. There's more, Hayes continued. Our intelligence networks have identified approximately 47 consortium facilities across the 7 territories. Most are small operations, but together they represent a massive human trafficking enterprise. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 47 facilities, hundreds, maybe thousands of victims. How do we coordinate rescue operations on that scale? Martha asked from her position at the servants' table, a placement that had caused significant controversy but which Catalina had insisted upon. Carefully, Miguel answered. He'd been quiet throughout most of the meeting, still adjusting to his new role as a free consultant rather than a potential threat. The facilities are networked. If we hit too many at once, they'll trigger destruction protocols. All evidence destroyed, all witnesses eliminated. What do you recommend? Lucian asked. Miguel studied the map, his recovered memories providing strategic insights that were both invaluable and deeply painful to access. Small teams, coordinated timing. We need to neutralize their communication networks first, then execute simultaneous strikes on clusters of facilities. How many people are we talking about rescuing? Healer Marin asked, already calculating medical requirements. If each facility holds an average of 15 to 20 subjects? Miguel's face went pale. Maybe 800 people total, all requiring immediate medical attention, psychological evaluation, and extended healing support. The silence that followed was deafening. 800 broken minds to heal, 800 families to reunite, 800 lives to rebuild from the ground up. It's impossible, Duke Mendoza said finally. We don't have the resources, the facilities, the trained personnel. We'll build them, Catalina said quietly. Your Majesty, we'll build them, she repeated, stronger this time. Because the alternative is leaving 800 people to die in consortium cells, and that's not acceptable. She stood, drawing every eye in the room. 6 months ago, I was a kitchen slave who believed I deserved nothing better than scrubbing floors. Today, I'm planning the largest rescue operation in the kingdom's history. People change. Situations change. What seems impossible becomes inevitable when enough people decide it's necessary. The logistics alone, Torres began, will be handled by people who understand logistics, Catalina interrupted. Martha's network has been moving people and resources under impossible conditions for years. The neutral territories have facilities we can expand. The medical communities have volunteers willing to help. She gestured around the table. And we have something the consortium doesn't. People who choose to work together instead of being forced to obey. Beta Counselor Hayes nodded approvingly. The neutral territories can provide initial funding and facility construction, but we'll need guarantees that rescued individuals won't be conscripted into territorial armies. You have my word, Catalina said immediately. And mine, added Lucian. One by one, the other territorial leaders voiced their agreement, some more enthusiastically than others, but all recognizing the political necessity of supporting what was rapidly becoming a popular movement. Then it's settled, Hayes said with satisfaction. We have 6 weeks to establish the infrastructure. After that, we begin the largest coordinated rescue operation in recorded history. As the meeting dispersed into smaller planning groups, Catalina found herself standing with Miguel near the great windows overlooking the palace gardens. Are you ready for this? She asked quietly. To help plan the rescue of 800 people who've suffered what I suffered? Miguel's expression was complex, pain mixed with determination. Your Majesty, this is what I was meant to do. Not the assassination mission they programmed me for, but this, turning my knowledge of their operations into a tool for liberation. It won't be easy. Some of the people we rescue will be as damaged as you were. Some might be worse. Some might be like Catherine, Miguel said softly, referring to the guard who'd chosen death over healing. People so broken they can't accept help. Then we'll mourn them and keep working to save the ones who can be saved. Miguel nodded, then asked the question that had been haunting both of them. What happens after? Once we've rescued everyone, dismantled their facilities, healed their victims, what kind of kingdom do we build from the pieces? Catalina looked out at the gardens where servants and nobles' children played together, where Elena was teaching a group of young people to identify healing herbs, where former enemies were learning to work toward common goals. A better one, she said simply. One where a person's worth isn't determined by the circumstances of their birth or the trauma they've survived. And if the old power structures resist that change, then we'll change them too, she replied with a confidence that surprised her. One rescued life at a time, one healed mind at a time, one opened heart at a time. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's approval and support. Through her empathic senses, she felt the cautious hope of everyone in the palace who dared to believe that things could be different. Change was coming to the 7 territories. And for the first time in her life, Catalina wasn't afraid of it. Chapter 18. The Storm. Before 3 weeks into the planning phase, the first attempt on Catalina's life came from an unexpected source. She was reviewing facility blueprints in the war room when the attack happened, not from outside assassins, but from one of their own rescued captives. A young man named David, whom they'd freed from a facility near the border, suddenly lunged at her with a kitchen knife, his eyes blank and mechanical. Target acquired, he said in the same flat tone Miguel had once used. Terminating Caelestis, Queen. Catalina barely had time to register the threat before Miguel intercepted him. The two crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, fighting for control of the blade. David, stop! She commanded, pouring her empathic abilities toward the struggling young man. You're safe! You're free! But her words seemed to bounce off him like water off stone. Whatever programming had been activated was completely blocking her ability to reach his consciousness. He's got deep conditioning we missed, Miguel grunted as he pinned David's knife hand. Dormant triggers designed to activate after rescue. The implications were terrifying. How many other rescued captives carried similar programming? How many walking time bombs had they welcomed into their midst? Healer Marin, Catalina called, but the older woman was already rushing into the room with a sedative prepared. It took 3 people to hold David still long enough for the medicine to take effect. As his struggles ceased and his eyes rolled back, the knife clattered to the floor, inches from where it might have found Catalina's heart. Emergency medical lockdown, Marin announced grimly. Every rescued captive needs immediate re-examination for hidden programming. The next 12 hours revealed the true scope of the problem. Of the 43 people they'd rescued so far, 11 carried dormant assassination protocols, all targeted at Catalina specifically, all designed to activate after a period of apparent recovery. They're not just trying to eliminate the Caelestis bloodline, Miguel said as they reviewed the disturbing findings. They're using our own compassion against us. Every person we save becomes a potential weapon. Then, we find a way to break that programming too, Catalina said firmly, though privately she was shaken by how close the attack had come to succeeding. The conditioning is deeper than what I carried, Miguel warned. More sophisticated. It might not be possible to remove without causing complete personality collapse. Then we find another way. Your Majesty, Duke Mendoza said carefully, perhaps we need to reconsider the scope of the rescue operations. If every captive we save represents a potential threat. No. Catalina's voice cut through the room like a blade. We don't abandon people because helping them is dangerous. We find ways to help them safely. And how do you propose we do that? Asked Alpha Chen, who'd remained at the palace to help coordinate the rescue planning. Catalina was quiet for a moment, thinking through possibilities. We start by acknowledging that we can't save everyone at once. Some people will need longer-term care, specialized facilities designed for the most heavily conditioned individuals. Essentially prisons, Mendoza said bluntly. Hospitals, she corrected. Secure medical facilities where people can heal at their own pace without endangering others. The resources required would be enormous, Chen pointed out. And the political implications are exactly why this needs to be done right. Catalina stood, moving to the wall map that showed planned rescue locations. We're not just saving individuals. We're proving that a better way is possible. That strength comes from protecting the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. And if we fail? Mendoza asked. If the next assassination attempt succeeds? If the consortium uses our compassion to destroy us entirely? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Through the bond, Catalina felt Lucien's complex emotions, pride in her determination warring with terror at the risks she was taking. Then we fail trying to do the right thing, she said simply. But I don't think we will fail, because for every person like David who carries hidden programming, there's someone like Miguel who can be truly healed. For every weapon they've created, there's a human being still buried underneath. She turned to face the assembled leaders. Tomorrow, we begin the most ambitious rescue operation in history. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, some of the people we save will require extensive care. Yes, we might lose some battles along the way. Her voice grew stronger with each word. But 20 years from now, when children ask how we responded to systematic human trafficking and magical slavery, I want the answer to be that we saved everyone we could. That we chose hope over fear, healing over retribution, and compassion over convenience. The silence that followed was broken by Miguel standing and moving to join her at the map. I'll help screen the rescued individuals, he said quietly. My experience with the conditioning protocols can help identify who needs immediate medical isolation. Miguel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is what I was truly made for. Not to kill, but to heal. Not to destroy, but to protect. He met her eyes with absolute certainty. Let me help you save them, Your Majesty. All of them. One by one, the other leaders in the room made their commitments. Resources, personnel, facilities, political support, everything necessary to turn an impossible dream into achievable reality. As the meeting dispersed and final preparations began, Catalina found herself alone with Lucian in the war room. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Really sure? Because once we begin tomorrow, there's no going back. The consortium will throw everything they have at us. I'm sure. She moved into his arms, drawing comfort from his solid presence. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about something. Even knowing it might kill you? Especially knowing that. Because if I die tomorrow, it will be as someone who chose to act rather than hide, someone who fought for others rather than just survived. She looked up at him, seeing her own determination reflected in his storm-gray eyes. I spent 15 years being afraid to matter. I won't spend the rest of my life being afraid to try. Through their bond, she felt his acceptance, his pride, and his absolute commitment to standing beside her regardless of the cost. Tomorrow would bring the largest rescue operation in the kingdom's history. Tonight they would hold each other and prepare for war. Chapter 19. The Great Liberation. The attacks began at dawn across 7 territories simultaneously. Catalina stood in the command center they'd established in the palace's communications tower, watching as magical message crystals lit up with reports from rescue teams across the kingdom. Each light represented a facility under assault, lives hanging in the balance, and the largest coordinated operation in recorded history. Northern team reports successful breach, announced Martha, coordinating communications with her usual efficiency. 15 captives secured, minimal resistance. Eastern Valley teams encountering heavy opposition, came another report, requesting magical support. Southern coastal facility has been evacuated. Miguel called from his position monitoring consortium communications, but they triggered destruction protocols. The building is collapsing. Catalina felt each report like a physical blow. Victories and losses, lives saved and potentially lost, all happening too fast to fully process. Western Mountain Facility. The crystal went dark mid-transmission. What happened? Lucian demanded. Miguel's face went pale as he analyzed the communication frequencies. They're jamming the mountain team. Either the facility has better defenses than expected, or it's a trap, Catalina finished. Through her empathic abilities, she could feel the emotional resonance of the various operations, the determination of rescue teams, the confusion and terror of captives suddenly thrust into chaotic freedom, and underneath it all, something else. Something that made her blood run cold. Miguel, how many consortium facilities did your intelligence identify? 47 confirmed locations. And how many are we hitting today? 31, with follow-up operations planned for... Miguel stopped, understanding dawning on his face. They evacuated the ones we're not attacking. They knew. The implications crashed over them like a tidal wave. Somehow the consortium had advance warning of the rescue operation. 16 facilities worth of captives had been moved to unknown locations. Hundreds of people who should have been freed today were instead being relocated to deeper, more secure prisons. How? Lucian's voice was deadly quiet. How did they know? Information leak, Martha said grimly. Someone with access to our planning has been feeding intelligence to the consortium. Impossible, Duke Mendoza protested. Every person in our planning meetings was thoroughly vetted. Not every person, Catalina said quietly, realization hitting her like lightning. The rescued captives. Some of them weren't just carrying assassination protocols. They were carrying communication devices. Miguel nodded grimly. Magical implants designed to record and transmit. Every planning meeting, every strategy session, every detail of our operations. The consortium has been listening through their own victims. The betrayal was crushing. In their determination to include rescued individuals in the planning process, to treat them as partners rather than just victims, they'd inadvertently given the enemy complete access to their operations. Status reports from all teams, Catalina commanded, pushing aside her emotional reaction to focus on immediate needs. How many people have we successfully rescued? The current count is 218, Martha reported, but the numbers are still coming in. 218 lives saved. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, knowing that hundreds more had been moved beyond their reach made it feel like failure. Your Majesty, came a voice from the communication crystal. This is Beta Captain Rodriguez from the Mountain Team. We're alive, but we need immediate medical evacuation. The facility was a trap. They had weaponized captives waiting for us. How many casualties? Healer Marin asked, already preparing medical teams. 7 wounded, none critical. But the captives, they've been conditioned to attack rescuers. We managed to sedate most of them, but some are in critical condition from fighting the programming. Bring everyone back, Catalina ordered. All rescued individuals, all team members. We'll sort out medical needs once everyone's safe. As the day wore on, the scope of both their success and failure became clear. 218 people were freed, but at enormous cost. 12 rescue team members seriously injured. 6 consortium facilities completely destroyed rather than allow capture. And an unknown number of captives relocated to locations they might never find. It's still a victory, Beta Counselor Hayes said as the leadership gathered for evening debriefing. 200 lives saved is nothing to dismiss. Tell that to the families of the people who were moved because we compromised our own operation. Catalina replied wearily. We couldn't have known about the communication implants, Lucian said, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. Couldn't we? We knew the consortium's conditioning was sophisticated. We should have assumed they'd have contingencies for rescue attempts. Miguel, who'd been quiet throughout the debriefing, finally spoke up. Your Majesty, with respect, you're thinking about this wrong. How so? You're seeing today as a partial failure because we didn't save everyone. But the consortium is seeing it as a catastrophic loss. 218 of their weapons are now free, 31 of their facilities were destroyed. Their entire operational security has been compromised. He stood, moving to the wall map that now showed red X's over destroyed facilities. More importantly, every territory in the kingdom now knows exactly what they've been doing. There's no more plausible deniability, no more hiding behind legitimate business fronts. They're exposed. Which makes them more dangerous, Duke Mendoza pointed out. Cornered animals fight hardest. True, Miguel agreed, but it also makes them desperate, and desperate enemies make mistakes. As if summoned by his words, an urgent communication crystal flared to life. Martha answered it, her face growing pale as she listened. What is it? Catalina asked. Message from consortium leadership. They want to negotiate. The room went silent. After months of shadow warfare and rescue operations, their enemies suddenly wanted to talk. It's obviously a trap, Mendoza said immediately. Probably, Catalina agreed. But what if it's not? What if they're genuinely ready to discuss terms? Terms for what? Lucien asked. Ending this, all of it. The kidnapping, the conditioning, the trafficking. She stood, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. If there's even a chance of stopping this without more bloodshed, don't we have an obligation to try? And if it's an ambush designed to eliminate you? Hayes asked pragmatically. Then at least we'll know where we stand. The debate that followed was intense but brief. In the end, they decided to respond to the consortium's request, but with conditions, safeguards, and enough backup to handle any betrayal. As preparations began for what might be the most important negotiation in the kingdom's history, Catalina found herself thinking about the 218 people currently being processed in healing facilities across the territories. Each one represented a victory. Each one proved that healing was possible, that people could come back from even the most horrific conditioning. But each one also represented all the others they hadn't been able to save yet. Tomorrow, she would sit across from the people who'd created this nightmare, and she would find a way to end it, one way or another. Chapter 20. The Parley. The negotiation site was a masterpiece of neutral territory paranoia. The ancient amphitheater sat on an island in the middle of Lake Serenity, accessible only by boat and surrounded by magical wards that prevented any kind of supernatural abilities from functioning within its boundaries. No alpha dominance, no omega persuasion, no empathic manipulation, just words and the weight of consequences. Catalina sat across from three figures who represented everything she'd spent her life fighting against. Director Voss, a cold-eyed woman whose very presence made the air feel thinner. Chief Conditioner Kane, a man whose calm demeanor couldn't disguise the cruelty radiating from him. And at their head, consortium leader Magnus Chen, whose relationship to Alpha Sovereign Chen had been a poorly kept secret for years. Your Majesty, Magnus said with a smile that never reached his eyes. How refreshing to finally meet the woman who's caused us so much inconvenience. Inconvenience? Catalina's voice was steady despite the fury building in her chest. Is that what you call systematic human trafficking? I call it resource management, Magnus replied smoothly. The kingdoms have always had a surplus population. Orphans, criminals, the mentally deficient. We simply found productive uses for individuals who would otherwise be burdens on society. The casual dehumanization hit her like a physical blow. These people genuinely believed they were performing a public service by enslaving and breaking human beings. Productive uses, Lucian repeated from his position at Catalina's right hand. Such as turning children into assassins? Among other applications, yes. Director Voss spoke for the first time, her voice as emotionless as a medical report. The Calestis bloodline in particular showed remarkable aptitude for specialized conditioning, very responsive to behavioral modification. Miguel shifted slightly in his chair, the only sign of how much those clinical words affected him. He'd insisted on attending the negotiation, arguing that his knowledge of consortium operations was essential. Now Catalina wondered if she should have protected him from facing his torturers directly. "Let's dispense with the moral posturing," Chief Conditioner Kane said impatiently. "You've disrupted our operations significantly. We've disrupted yours. Neither of us can continue these hostilities indefinitely without substantial losses." "So you want to call a truce?" Duke Mendoza asked skeptically. "We want to discuss terms for coexistence," Magnus clarified. "The consortium has no particular interest in territorial conquest or political control. We simply require access to certain populations for our research and development programs." "Research and development," Catalina repeated slowly. "You mean torture and slavery?" "Semantics," Magnus waved dismissively. "The point is, we're prepared to significantly reduce our recruitment activities in exchange for certain guarantees." "What kind of guarantees?" Lucian asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "Primarily, the cessation of rescue operations against our facilities and the return of our property currently held in your healing centers." The demand hung in the air like a death sentence. They wanted her to hand over the 218 people they'd risked everything to save. "Never," Catalina said quietly. "Perhaps you should consider our offer more carefully," Director Voss said with clinical detachment. "We currently hold approximately 600 individuals in secure facilities, all with supernatural bloodlines, all quite valuable for research purposes. The threat was clear. Agree to their terms or watch 600 people disappear forever into consortium conditioning programs." "And if we refuse?" Miguel asked, speaking directly to his former captors for the first time. Kane's smile was genuinely warm and absolutely terrifying. "Hello, Subject 37. You're looking remarkably well for someone who should be dead. My name is Miguel Santos. Your name is whatever we programmed it to be. Just as your personality, your memories, your sense of self, all of it belongs to us." Kane leaned forward. "Did you really think we only installed one set of control protocols? You have 3 backup conditioning systems that can be activated remotely at any time." Through her empathic connection, Catalina felt Miguel's terror spike. Whatever conditioning remained in his mind was responding to Kane's words, threatening to drag him back into the mechanical obedience they'd worked so hard to break. "He's lying," she said firmly, reaching out to squeeze Miguel's hand. "We removed all the programming." "Did you?" Kane's voice carried amused certainty. "Subject 37, authorization code Omega 77 Alpha. Report status." Miguel went rigid. For a terrifying moment, his eyes went blank and mechanical. Then, with visible effort, he shook his head. "That won't work anymore," he said, though his voice was strained. "I'm not your weapon." Kane looked genuinely surprised. "Fascinating. The conditioning removal was more thorough than we anticipated." "It wasn't removal," Catalina said, understanding flooding through her. "It was transformation. We didn't erase what you did to him. We helped him make it his own." "Impossible," Director Voss said sharply. "Conditioned responses can't be voluntarily controlled. They can when the person chooses integration over suppression, when they're given the power to transform their trauma into strength." Catalina stood, her voice carrying new authority. "That's what you never understood. People aren't objects to be programmed. They're individuals with the inherent capacity to heal, to grow, to choose who they want to become." Magnus's facade of calm cracked slightly. "Your philosophical idealism is touching, but ultimately irrelevant. We hold 600 lives. You hold 200 of ours. Simple mathematics suggests a trade is in order." "There won't be a trade," Lucian said flatly. The people in our healing centers aren't property to be exchanged. Then perhaps we should demonstrate the consequences of continued resistance. Magnus nodded to Director Voss, who produced a small crystal communicator. Facility 7, commence termination protocols, she said into the device. Catalina felt her heart stop. What does that mean? It means 50 individuals who could have lived productive lives as conditioned assets will instead be eliminated as a demonstration of our resolve. Magnus's expression remained pleasantly neutral. Their deaths are on your conscience, Your Majesty. The casual ordering of mass murder hit the negotiating table like a bomb. Around her, Catalina felt the shock and horror of her companions. But underneath that, something else was building. Something that made the magical wards around the amphitheater begin to hum with strain. Cancel that order, she said quietly. I'm afraid that's not possible. Once termination protocols begin, cancel that order. Her voice carried power that shouldn't have been possible within the ward's suppression field. Magnus frowned, clearly noticing the phenomenon. How interesting. Your abilities seem to be functioning despite the nullification field. My abilities aren't supernatural, Catalina said, golden light beginning to emanate from her skin. They're human. The capacity to care about others, to refuse to accept cruelty, to choose compassion over convenience, those aren't magical gifts. They're choices available to everyone. The light intensified, and she felt something extraordinary happen. Through her connection with Miguel, she sensed the other rescued individuals in healing centers across the kingdom. Through them, she sensed the 600 still in consortium custody, and through those connections, she felt something the enemy couldn't have anticipated. They weren't broken anymore, not completely. Her healing of Miguel had created a network. Every person she'd touched, every mind she'd helped restore, was connected to her and to each other. You're right about one thing, she said to Magnus as power continued to build around her. This is about mathematics. 600 of your prisoners against every healed mind in the kingdom. Every person who remembers what freedom feels like. Every individual who chooses hope over despair. She reached out through the network, feeling the response as hundreds of minds. Freed slaves, former captives, people who'd been broken and then chosen to heal, answered her call. What are you doing? Director Voss demanded, her clinical calm finally cracking. What I should have done from the beginning, Catalina replied. I'm giving them a choice. Across the kingdom, in consortium facilities that had seemed impregnable, captives who'd been conditioned into compliance suddenly felt something they'd forgotten, the possibility of resistance. Not violent revolution, but simple human refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable. The communication crystal in Voss's hand began crackling with urgent reports. Facility 7 reporting a mass awakening event. Subjects refusing commands. Security requesting backup. Impossible, Kane breathed. The conditioning should prevent any coordinated resistance. Conditioning works by isolation, Miguel said, understanding dawning on his face. By making people believe they're alone, helpless, worthless. But what happens when you suddenly realize you're not alone? When you feel hundreds of other minds choosing freedom at the same time? The answer came through dozens of communication crystals as consortium facilities across the kingdom reported the same phenomenon, systematic collapse of behavioral conditioning as captives remembered they were human beings with the power to choose. This negotiation is over, Magnus said, standing abruptly. You've just declared war on an organization with resources you can't imagine. No, Catalina said peacefully. I've just reminded 600 people that they have the right to say no. As the consortium representatives fled the amphitheater, leaving behind threats and promises of retaliation, Catalina felt the network of minds settling into something new. Not a hive mind or collective consciousness, but a support system. A way for people who'd survived the worst humanity could inflict to remind each other that healing was possible. What happens now? Lucian asked as they prepared to leave the island. Now we help them come home, she said simply. All of them, however long it takes. Because the negotiation had accomplished something neither side had anticipated. It had proven that the most powerful force in the world wasn't magical abilities or military might. It was the simple human choice to care about each other. And that was a power no amount of conditioning could ever truly destroy. Chapter 21, The Awakening Storm. The consortium's retaliation came within hours. Catalina stood in the palace communications center as reports flooded in from across the kingdom. Not military attacks, something far more insidious. Every major trade route had been disrupted, banking systems crashed, communication networks went down, food shipments disappeared. They're trying to starve us into submission, Duke Mendoza said grimly, studying the pattern of disruptions. Cut off our resources until we have no choice but to negotiate. How long can the territories sustain this level of economic disruption? Beta Counselor Hayes asked. Maybe 3 months if we implement strict rationing, came the reply from Treasurer Vega. Less if they escalate. Through the empathic network she'd awakened, Catalina could feel the confusion and fear rippling across the kingdom. Hundreds of freed minds suddenly faced with the reality that choosing freedom came with a price, not just for themselves but for everyone around them. They're trying to turn the population against us, she realized. Make people regret supporting the rescue operations. It might work, Martha said bluntly from her position monitoring servant communications. My network is already reporting increased tensions in the working districts. People are scared. Miguel, who'd been unusually quiet since the negotiation, finally spoke up. There's something else. The mass awakening you triggered, it didn't just affect current captives. Every person who's ever been through consortium conditioning felt it. What does that mean? Lucian asked. It means there are conditioned individuals throughout the kingdom who weren't in active facilities, sleeper agents placed in noble houses, government positions, merchant guilds. Miguel's face was pale. They're all waking up simultaneously, remembering what was done to them. Some will choose freedom, but others will choose revenge, Catalina finished, understanding the implications. As if summoned by her words, urgent communications began streaming in. A fire at the Northern Grain Warehouse, started by a servant who'd suddenly remembered being taken from her family as a child. A banking official in the Eastern Valleys transferring massive funds to unknown accounts before disappearing. 3 separate noble houses reporting assassination attempts by their own staff. It's chaos, Hayes said, her usual composure cracking. The awakening is destabilizing everything. Because that's what the consortium wanted, Miguel said with bitter understanding. They knew this would happen if their conditioning was disrupted on a massive scale. They're counting on the chaos to discredit everything we've accomplished. Catalina felt the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on her. In her determination to save the captives, she'd triggered a kingdom-wide crisis that might cost more lives than the original problem. Your Majesty, came an urgent voice from the communication crystals. This is Captain Rodriguez from the border territories. We're receiving reports of consortium military forces massing just outside our territorial boundaries. How many? Lucian asked, his alpha instincts immediately focusing on the military threat. Unknown, but significant. At least 5,000 ground forces, plus aerial support and siege equipment. They're not trying to hide their presence. 5,000 troops. More than the kingdom's standing military could handle, especially with internal chaos disrupting command structures. They're not planning to conquer us, Catalina said with sudden clarity. They're planning to rescue their assets, every conditioned individual in the kingdom, whether they want to be rescued or not. That's impossible, Mendoza protested. The logistics alone. Unless they never intended to extract everyone, Miguel interrupted. Just the most valuable ones, the ones in key positions who could cause maximum damage if left free. The implications were staggering. A military operation designed not to hold territory, but to recapture strategically placed assets and eliminate threats to consortium operations. How long do we have? Catalina asked. Based on the force positioning, maybe 48 hours before they begin infiltration operations, Rodriguez reported. 48 hours to prepare for a war unlike anything the kingdom had ever faced. Not a traditional conflict between territories, but a battle for the minds and souls of their own people. Emergency council meeting, Lucian ordered. All territorial leaders, all military commanders, all— No, Catalina said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. This isn't a problem we can solve with traditional councils and military strategy, she continued. This is a problem we solve by doing what the consortium never expected us to do. Which is? Hayes asked. We ask for help, from everyone. Not just the nobility, not just the military, but every person in the kingdom who's ever been overlooked, discounted, or forgotten. Catalina stood, feeling certainty settle into her bones. The consortium's strength comes from isolation, from making people believe they're powerless. Our strength comes from connection. You want to arm the civilian population? Mendoza asked incredulously. I want to trust them with the truth. All of it. What the consortium has been doing, what's happening now, what we're facing in the next 2 days. She moved to the central communication array. And then I want to let them choose how to respond. The panic alone could destroy everything, Hayes warned. Or it could create something the consortium never planned for, a kingdom full of people who understand exactly what they're fighting for. Miguel nodded slowly. She's right. The conditioning works because people don't understand what's happening to them. But if everyone knows, if everyone can see the pattern, then everyone becomes part of the resistance, Martha finished, understanding dawning on her face. This is madness, Mendoza said. You're talking about revealing state secrets to the entire population. I'm talking about treating our people like partners instead of subjects, Catalina corrected. Like human beings capable of making informed choices about their own lives. The debate that followed was brief but intense. In the end, the decision came down to a simple question. Did they trust their own people enough to tell them the truth? Emergency broadcast to all territories, Catalina ordered as the council reached consensus. Every communication crystal, every message relay, every method we have of reaching the population. As technicians prepared the kingdom-wide communication network, Catalina felt the weight of an entire civilization's future settling on her shoulders. In a few minutes, she would address more people simultaneously than any ruler in history, and she would ask them to do something unprecedented: save themselves. What will you tell them? Lucian asked as they prepared for the broadcast. The truth, she said simply. That they matter, that they have power, that the choice of what kind of world we live in belongs to all of us, not just the people born into positions of authority. Through the empathic network, she could feel the anticipation of hundreds of awakened minds, people who'd been broken and chosen to heal, who understood better than anyone what freedom truly cost. They were ready to fight for it. The question was whether the rest of the kingdom would join them. Chapter 22. The Choice. The broadcast reached every corner of the 7 territories simultaneously. In noble halls and servants' quarters, in market squares and farming villages, in workshops and healing centers, Catalina's voice carried through magical communication crystals with unprecedented clarity. For the first time in the kingdom's history, a ruler spoke directly to every citizen at once. My name is Catalina Vasquez, she began, using her maiden name deliberately. 3 months ago, I was a kitchen slave. Today, I am your queen. I'm speaking to you now not because of the title I hold, but because of the choice we all face together. She paused, feeling the weight of millions of minds focusing on her words. For decades, an organization called the Eastern Consortium has been operating in our territories. They have kidnapped our children, enslaved our families, and turned human beings into weapons. They have done this with the knowledge and sometimes the cooperation of people in positions of power. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Through the empathic network, Catalina felt shock, rage, disbelief, and underneath it all, a growing recognition as pieces of long puzzling disappearances suddenly fit together. Today, they demand that we return the people we've rescued to their custody. They threaten economic collapse if we refuse. In 48 hours, they will invade our territories to reclaim what they consider their property. She let that sink in before continuing. I could ask you to trust your leaders to handle this crisis. I could promise that your armies and your nobles will protect you. But I won't do that, because this fight isn't just about military strategy or political maneuvering. It's about who we choose to be as a people. Through the palace windows, she could see crowds gathering in the courtyard below, faces turned toward the communication crystals with expressions ranging from fear to determination. The consortium's power comes from isolation. They succeed by making people believe they're alone, helpless, worthless. They count on us seeing each other as servants and masters, as valuable and disposable, as worthy and unworthy of protection. Her voice grew stronger, carrying the authority born from lived experience rather than inherited title. But here's what they never understood. Every person matters. Every life has value. Every individual has the power to choose who they want to be, regardless of the circumstances of their birth or the trauma they've survived. Around the kingdom, she felt the network of awakened minds responding, hundreds of people who'd been broken and chosen to heal, adding their strength to her words. So I'm not asking you to trust your leaders. I'm asking you to trust each other. I'm asking servants to stand with nobles, farmers to work with merchants, parents to protect all children, not just their own. She paused for the most important part of her message. In the next 48 hours, you will face a choice. You can wait for someone else to solve this problem, or you can become part of the solution. You can hide behind the walls of your homes, or you can step forward to defend your neighbors. You can accept that some people are born to serve while others are born to rule, or you can prove that every person deserves dignity, freedom, and the chance to choose their own path. Through the communication crystals came the sound of voices, not organized cheering, but the murmur of millions of people talking to each other, making connections, realizing they were not alone. The consortium is coming to take back people they consider property, but those people aren't property. They're our family, our friends, our neighbors. They're human beings who deserve the chance to heal, to grow, to become whoever they choose to be. Catalina's voice rose, carrying passion that resonated through every crystal in the kingdom. So here's what I'm asking. If you see someone struggling with awakened memories of conditioning, help them. If you know of consortium sympathizers in your community, watch them but don't attack them. Many are victims too. If you have skills that could help, healing, crafting, organizing, fighting, use them. If you have resources to share, share them. If you have nothing but the determination to stand up for what's right, that's enough. She felt the emotional response building across the territories, fear transforming into resolve, isolation giving way to connection, despair being replaced by hope. The consortium believes we will fracture under pressure, that self-interest will overcome compassion, that fear will triumph over love. They're wrong. In the next 2 days, we will prove that a kingdom united by choice is stronger than an empire built on coercion. The broadcast was reaching its end, but Catalina had one more thing to say, the most important thing. You don't have to do this because I'm your queen. You don't have to do this because it's your duty. Do it because it's right. Do it because you choose to live in a world where everyone matters. Do it because you believe that healing is possible, that people can change, that tomorrow can be better than today. She took a breath, feeling the weight of an entire civilization's response. The choice is yours, all of yours. Choose wisely, choose bravely, and choose together. The broadcast ended, leaving behind a silence that lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the kingdom exploded into action. Through every communication, crystal came reports of spontaneous organization. Servants forming protection groups for vulnerable noble families whose guards might be compromised. Merchants redirecting supplies to healing centers. Farmers organizing food distribution networks to bypass consortium economic disruption. Most remarkable of all, the awakened, conditioned individuals weren't hiding or fleeing. They were stepping forward to help, using their knowledge of consortium operations to identify threats and prepare defenses. "It's working," Martha reported, her voice filled with wonder. "Every territory is reporting massive civilian mobilization, not panic, coordination. Population centers are organizing neighborhood watch groups," came another report. "Rural areas are setting up communication networks between villages. The healing centers are receiving volunteer support beyond anything we imagined." Miguel looked up from his position monitoring consortium communications. "They're in chaos. Their intelligence assumed civil unrest and economic collapse, not coordinated civilian resistance." Through the palace windows, Catalina could see the courtyard filling with people, not fleeing in terror, but arriving to offer help. Servants and nobles working side by side, former enemies united by common purpose. "What have you done?" Lucian asked, but his tone held awe rather than concern. "What I should have done from the beginning," she replied. "I trusted them to choose." And across the 7 territories, millions of people were proving that her trust had been well placed. The consortium had expected to face a fractured kingdom torn apart by revelations of corruption and infiltration. Instead, they would face something far more dangerous: a united people who had freely chosen to stand together. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 23. The Final Stand. The invasion came at dawn, but the consortium found something they hadn't prepared for. As their forces crested the hills overlooking the border territories, they discovered thousands of kingdom citizens arranged not for battle but for witness. Farmers with their families, merchants with their goods, servants and nobles standing together, all carrying white banners marked with an open hand. Catalina watched from the command post as the enemy forces halted, clearly bewildered by what they were seeing. "They expected panic," Miguel observed, studying the consortium formations through a far-seeing crystal. "Military resistance, economic chaos, not this." "Phase 2, Catalina said into her communication device. "Begin the testimony." Across the valley, Miguel stepped forward with dozens of other survivors, his voice magically amplified to reach both armies. "My name is Miguel Santos. I was 8 when they took me. For 17 years, the Eastern Consortium held me captive, broke my mind, and turned me into a weapon." Behind him, other voices joined in, a chorus of survival that struck the consortium forces like physical blows. "I'm Rosa Santos, they stole my memories. David Chen, they taught me to hate instead of heal. Elena Vasquez, they told me I was worthless." Through her empathic senses, Catalina felt the shock reverberating through the enemy ranks. These were their victims, people who should have been broken, grateful, compliant. Instead, they stood strong, unified, offering healing instead of demanding revenge. "We're not here to fight you," Miguel continued. "We're here to offer you the same choice we were given, the chance to remember who you were before they made you into weapons." The response was immediate. Consortium communication arrays lit up with panicked reports as field personnel, many of whom carried their own suppressed conditioning, began to remember fragments of their own stolen childhoods. "Some of our specialists are requesting permission to cross the lines," came a trembling voice through intercepted communications. "Denied!" Magnus Chen's voice crackled with desperation. "Begin suppression bombardment." But as magical death spells arced toward the gathered civilians, something unprecedented happened. The empathic network Catalina had awakened linked every healed mind in the kingdom, creating a collective shield powered not by individual strength, but by mutual choice to protect each other. The death magic struck their barrier and transformed, becoming healing energy that strengthened every connected mind. "Impossible!" Magnus's control was cracking. "Cooperative magic can't be that powerful." "It's not magic," Catalina replied, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "It's choice. The choice to care about each other more than we fear you." That's when Director Voss stepped forward with a device that radiated wrongness like a physical presence. Ultimate Sanction Protocol. If we cannot reclaim our assets, we ensure they cannot be used against us. Memory bomb, Miguel said urgently through the network. Designed to lobotomize every mind that's ever been conditioned. They'd rather kill us all than lose control. Elena suddenly stepped from the crowd, walking calmly toward the device with empty hands and peaceful expression. "Stop!" Voss commanded. "One more step and I activate early." "I know," Elena said simply. "That's why I'm here." "Elena, don't!" Catalina reached out through the network, but the girl's mind blazed with absolute purpose. "You made one mistake," Elena told Voss. "You thought conditioning was about control, but it was really about connection. You linked our minds to your systems, and when we healed, those connections became something you never intended." She was within arm's reach now. "We're connected to it. All of us. Every conditioned mind everywhere. And connection works both ways." Catalina gasped, understanding Elena's intention. The girl wasn't stopping the device. She was preparing to redirect it. "When you activate that bomb, it will follow our connections, but instead of destroying minds, it will free them. Every person you've ever conditioned everywhere in the world will wake up and remember who they really are." Voss went white. "The feedback would kill you." "Yes," Elena agreed peacefully. "But it would end this. Forever. No more children taken. No more families destroyed." The girl who'd wanted to be a healer placed her hands on the ultimate weapon. "This is my choice." "Elena, no!" But Catalina's cry came too late. Elena smiled, her mind blazing with joy. "Tell them it doesn't have to hurt anymore." The device activated. Instead of destruction, pure healing energy poured out, following every thread of conditioning across the continent. Every consortium facility, every conditioned individual, every suppressed memory suddenly blazed with the light of choice. Elena's body collapsed, her life spent in the greatest act of healing in history. But her smile remained, and through the network her final emotion resonated. Absolute love for everyone she'd just set free. The silence lasted one heartbeat. Then, from across the continent, came the sound of chains breaking. Chapter 24. After the Storm. 1 year after Elena's sacrifice, Catalina stood in the Great Hall addressing representatives from 23 territories. The transformation was visible everywhere. Where rigid hierarchies once separated people by birth, cooperative networks had emerged. The girl who'd once scrubbed floors now helped reshape how entire societies organized themselves. "The integration protocol has been adapted by 18 territories," she reported. "Over 8,000 individuals freed from conditioning, 300 rehabilitation centers established, and 17 regions have completely eliminated hereditary bondage." But the numbers, impressive as they were, only told part of the story. "However," she continued, "we've learned that healing individual trauma is insufficient if the systems that created it remain unchanged. Economic coercion, political disenfranchisement, social exclusion, these are all forms of conditioning that operate at institutional levels." Duke Mendoza, now serving as Minister of Transitional Justice, nodded from his seat. The past year had transformed him from a political opportunist into someone genuinely committed to systemic change. The question becomes, how do we restructure entire social systems without creating new forms of oppression? "Carefully," Miguel answered from his position as Continental Coordinator for Survivor Services, and with constant input from the people most affected by these changes. Through the windows, Catalina could see evidence of that input at work. Former slaves collaborated with former masters on everything from trade policy to childhood education. Rosa Santos worked in the palace gardens alongside nobility, both groups learning to nurture life instead of exploit it. The neutral territories have requested assistance with their own integration efforts, reported Beta Counselor Hayes, but they're concerned about adapting our model to their cultural frameworks. "Which brings us to the central challenge," Catalina said. "How do we share what we've learned without imposing our specific solutions on communities with different needs?" The debate that followed was complex but respectful. A year of cooperative dialogue had taught even former enemies how to disagree productively while working toward common goals. Resource allocation remains the primary constraint, pointed out Representative Torres. Healing centers require massive investment, and not every territory has the economic foundation we've built here. But some of our most successful programs have emerged in resource-poor areas, Miguel countered. Scarcity often makes cooperation more necessary, not less. Martha, now serving as Director of Communications Networks, added her perspective from coordinating with underground organizations across the continent. The servant networks in struggling territories are often more developed than those in wealthy regions. They've had to be, for survival. As the discussion continued, Catalina felt the weight of an expanded empathic network, now encompassing voluntary participants from across multiple kingdoms. Elena's sacrifice had created connections that transcended borders, linking minds that chose to share strength and hope. "Before we adjourn," she said, "I want to address something personal." The hall quieted, giving her complete attention. 18 months ago, I was a slave who believed invisibility was safety. Today, I help coordinate policy across 23 territories. That transformation wasn't magic or charity. It was the result of people choosing to see potential instead of limitations. She gestured around the hall, taking in faces that represented every level of society working together. Every person here has that same power. The power to look beyond what someone was forced to become and recognize who they could choose to be. The power to transform oppression into opportunity, isolation into connection, fear into hope. Through the network, she felt the response, determination, commitment, and the quiet strength of people who'd decided to build something better than what they'd inherited. "The Continental Assembly has invited us to present our integration model," Lucian announced as the session concluded. 41 territories want to learn from our experience. "Then we'll go," Catalina decided. "Not to impose our system, but to share what we've learned and learn from what others have discovered." "And if they reject our approach?" "Then we keep building here, and hope our example inspires others to try their own experiments in cooperation." As delegates dispersed to handle the practical work of governance, Catalina found herself in the courtyard where Elena's memorial stood. The simple stone bore the girl's words. "Sometimes being invisible keeps you alive long enough to matter." Miguel joined her, his presence steady after all they'd shared. "Think it will work?" he asked. "These grand plans for continental cooperation? Some will work. Some will fail. Some will evolve into things we never imagined." She smiled, feeling the vast network of healed minds stretching beyond their borders. But the important part isn't whether any specific plan succeeds. It's that people are choosing to try. Elena would be proud. Elena would be in the implementation committees making sure nobody got forgotten in the grand schemes, Catalina replied with affection that held both sadness and joy. She always cared more about individual people than abstract ideals. As evening settled over the kingdom, Catalina felt the peace that came from work begun rather than work completed. There would always be more healing needed, more systems to reform, more people to help find their way from survival to growth. But tonight, across multiple kingdoms, millions would sleep free. Free to choose their paths, build their communities, become whoever they decided to be. Tomorrow, they would choose again. And that, she'd learned, was the real revolution, not dramatic transformation, but the daily decision to believe everyone mattered, healing was possible, and together they could build something better. Chapter 25. The Light Spreads. 5 years after Elena's sacrifice, Catalina stood before the Continental Assembly in the great amphitheater of the neutral territories. The sight still took her breath away. Representatives from 47 territories filled the curved seats, not just traditional nobility, but a revolutionary mix that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Former slaves debated with former masters. Children who'd survived conditioning played in the gardens while their parents shaped continental policy. The cooperative integration model has now been adapted by 39 territories, she reported to the assembled delegates. Each region has modified the approach to fit their cultural needs, but the core principles remain: voluntary participation, trauma-informed healing, and the fundamental belief that every person has the right to choose who they become. The transformation was staggering. Over 20,000 individuals are freed from various forms of conditioning. 500 rehabilitation centers operating across the continent. 24 territories that had completely restructured their social systems to eliminate hereditary oppression. But Catalina had learned that the most important changes weren't visible in statistics. However, she continued, we must acknowledge that conditioning takes many forms: economic coercion, political disenfranchisement, social exclusion based on birth circumstances. These operate as systemic trauma that requires systemic healing. From her position at the podium, she could see the complex reactions across the amphitheater. Some delegates nodded with hard-earned understanding. Others looked skeptical. A few seemed to be calculating how to adapt her words to their own agendas. The question before us isn't whether change is necessary, she said, her voice carrying the authority of lived transformation. The question is whether we'll choose conscious evolution or wait for circumstances to force change upon us. Representative Torres from the Mountain Kingdoms raised a practical concern. The cooperative model works in territories with strong economies, but what about regions still recovering from resource depletion? Miguel, now serving as Continental Coordinator, stood to respond. Some of our most successful integration programs have emerged in resource-poor areas. Scarcity often makes cooperation essential rather than optional. But cultural resistance, began another delegate, is real and must be respected, Catalina acknowledged, which is why we're not proposing a universal model. We're proposing universal principles that can be adapted locally. The right to choose your path, the responsibility to consider how your choices affect others, the understanding that individual healing and community well-being are interconnected. The debate continued for hours, touching on everything from economic policy to educational reform. But underneath the practical details, Catalina sensed something more significant: a fundamental shift in how people thought about power, authority, and social organization. Before we conclude, she said, as the session drew to a close, I want to share something personal. The amphitheater quieted completely. 7 years ago, I was a slave who survived by becoming invisible. I believed I deserved nothing better than scrubbing floors and staying unnoticed. Today, I address representatives from across the continent as an equal among equals. She paused, feeling the weight of that journey. That change wasn't magic, it wasn't luck. It wasn't charity from benevolent superiors. It was the result of people, first one, then dozens, then thousands, choosing to believe that everyone deserves dignity, healing, and the chance to grow. Her voice strengthened with conviction. Every person in this room has that same power, the power to see past what someone was forced to become and recognize who they could choose to be. The power to transform systems of oppression into networks of support. As she spoke, Catalina felt the empathic network that had grown beyond anything they'd originally imagined. Millions of minds across the continent, connected by choice rather than compulsion, sharing strength and hope and determination to create something better. Real change happens in moments of individual choice, she concluded. The choice to help rather than harm, to include rather than exclude, to heal rather than hurt. She looked around the amphitheater one final time, meeting eyes with people who'd been enemies, allies, strangers, and friends. We've proven a better world is possible. The question is whether we'll choose to build it. Together. The applause wasn't polite political acknowledgement. It was the sound of people recognizing truth, accepting responsibility, and committing to transformation. As the assembly moved into practical implementation discussions, Catalina stepped outside to the gardens where Elena's memorial had been recreated. The original inscription remained. Sometimes being invisible keeps you alive long enough to matter. but the Continental Assembly had added new words underneath. And sometimes mattering means helping others become visible too. Miguel joined her at the memorial, as he had so many times over the years. Elena would have loved this, he said softly, gesturing toward the amphitheater where former enemies collaborated on policies to heal continental trauma. Elena would be in there arguing about implementation details, Catalina replied, with a laugh that held both sadness and joy. Making sure the grand ideals translated into help for actual people. As sunset painted the sky in gold and crimson, Catalina felt the profound peace that came from work well begun. There would always be more healing needed, more systems to transform, more people to help journey from survival to flourishing. But tonight, across an entire continent, millions would sleep free. Free to choose their own paths, build their own communities, become whoever they decided to be. And tomorrow, they would wake up and choose again. That was the real revolution Elena had died to create. Not a single dramatic transformation, but the daily decision to believe that everyone mattered, that healing was possible, and that together people could build something infinitely better than what they'd inherited. The girl who'd once scrubbed floors while believing she deserved invisibility had become a woman who helped reshape the world by teaching people to see the light in each other. And across the continent, that light continued to spread. One choice, one person, one community at a time. Through the empathic network that connected them all, Catalina felt Elena's presence like a warm embrace. The girl who'd sacrificed everything to break the chains of an entire continent lived on in every mind that chose freedom, every heart that chose healing, every person who decided that love was stronger than fear. The work would continue, the light would spread, and no one would ever have to be invisible again. In choosing to matter, we light the way for others to find their own significance. Final entry in the personal journals of Queen Catalina Vasquez. Everything from economic policy to educational reform to the role of traditional nobility in evolved societies. But underneath the practical details, Catalina could feel something more significant. A fundamental shift in how people thought about power, authority, and social organization. Before we conclude, she said as the session drew to a close, I want to share something personal. The amphitheater quieted, giving her their complete attention. 6 years ago, I was a slave who believed I deserved nothing better than invisibility. I survived by becoming so unimportant that no one bothered to hurt me. Today, I stand before representatives from across the continent as an equal among equals. She paused, feeling the weight of that transformation. That change wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It wasn't charity from benevolent superiors. It was the result of people, first one, then dozens, then thousands, choosing to believe that everyone deserves dignity, healing, and the chance to grow. Her voice strengthened with conviction. Every person in this room has that same power, the power to see past what someone was forced to become and recognize who they could choose to be, the power to transform systems of oppression into networks of support, the power to build societies where strength comes from lifting each other up, rather than keeping each other down. As she spoke, Catalina felt the empathic network that had grown far beyond anything they'd originally imagined. Millions of minds across the continent, connected not by magical compulsion, but by voluntary choice, sharing strength and hope and the determination to create something better. The Continental Assembly can recommend policies, allocate resources, and coordinate efforts, she concluded. But real change happens in moments of individual choice, the choice to help rather than harm, the choice to include rather than exclude, the choice to heal rather than hurt. She looked around the amphitheater one final time, meeting eyes with people who'd once been enemies, allies, strangers, and friends. The question isn't whether a better world is possible. We've proven it is. The question is whether we'll choose to build it, together. The applause that followed wasn't the polite acknowledgement typical of political gatherings. It was the sound of people recognizing truth, accepting responsibility, and committing to the hard work of transformation. As delegates began the practical work of turning inspiration into legislation, Catalina stepped outside into the gardens where Elena's memorial had been recreated. The inscription remained the same. Sometimes being invisible keeps you alive long enough to matter. But underneath, added by the Continental Assembly, were new words. And sometimes mattering means helping others become visible too. Miguel joined her at the memorial, his presence steady and reassuring after all these years. "Think it will work?" he asked. "All these grand plans and cooperative frameworks? Some of it will work, some will fail, some will evolve into things we never imagined." She smiled, feeling the vast network of healed minds stretching across the continent like a web of light. But the important part isn't whether any specific plan succeeds, it's that people are choosing to try. "Elena would be proud," he said softly. "Elena would be working in the implementation committees, making sure nobody got forgotten in the grand schemes," Catalina replied with a laugh that held both sadness and joy. She always cared more about individual people than abstract ideals. As the sun set over the neutral territories, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catalina felt the peace that came from work well begun rather than work completed. There would always be more healing needed, more systems to reform, more people to help find their way from survival to growth. But tonight, across the continent, millions of people would sleep free. Free to choose their own paths, free to build their own communities, free to become whoever they decided to be. And tomorrow, they would wake up and choose again. That, Catalina had learned, was the real revolution, not a single dramatic transformation, but the daily decision to believe that everyone mattered, that healing was possible, and that together they could build something better than what they'd inherited. The girl who'd once scrubbed floors while believing she deserved nothing better had become a woman who helped reshape the world by teaching people to see the possibilities in each other. And she was just getting started. The light we kindle in others illuminates our own path home. Final entry in the journal of Queen Catalina Vasquez, first sovereign of the cooperative territories.